Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Lore Lodge. Unfortunately, Aiden is too far to the side of the screen, so I'm going to fix that really quickly. But for those who have been watching the last couple weeks of content, I know we're harping on Tartaria a lot. This is hopefully the last one where we're going to be talking about it for a little while. But we decided it was the best way we could go about this is to bring somebody on who is into the community, has opinions, but is a little bit more on the I don't want to use the term reasoned or rational because I don't want to imply anything, but more on the let's have a civil discussion side and less on the let me hit you with the most outlandish thing you've ever heard side, which is kind of where people told us we were with Mind Unveiled when we responded to his video, because we basically had a bunch of people go, all right, well he's pretty out there, could you talk to somebody who's not quite that extreme. Andreas, your name came up, so do you want to introduce yourself and tell everybody who you are and why you're here?
The world is flat. It's run by lizard people. The lesbians control Hollywood. No, I'm just kidding. I'm sorry. I'm Andreas. It's good to see you. Yeah, I think it's funny because I've been talking about Tartaria for a long time, and I do a lot of other things. I started out working, you found me through Timcast, and I worked in just regular back-end media there, and also doing like the vlog, but before that, I worked for CNN as a social media strategist, and I have a degree in nanotechnology for material sciences. I worked in graphene, so I was more of an engineer. But I'm Slavic, and I was always kind of interested in Slavic history. And Tartaria is a thing that's like on maps, and it's been there forever. So I figured we would look into it. Taurus Bulba talks about the Tartars, and so I was pretty familiar with it. And then people were like, "Whoa, have you heard of this Atlantis thing?" And it kind of freaked people out. Like they're like, this is crazy. But a lot of that's not that insane. And there are a lot of things since then. So in the last 4 or 5 years, there's been so many videos on YouTube, and YouTubers are not historians. And it's kind of like newspapers. The newsies sell the newspaper. So they're out there trying to extrapolate the most interesting, like there were giants. Well, there are really interesting things about rather large people. You can look into the Potsdam Giants. I think the Potsdam Giants is an interesting story. Napoleon killed a bunch of these guys who were over 7 foot tall. But before that, King George Wilhelm in Hanover he hired the biggest people he could find in the Prussian Empire. He also had recruited from Janissaries from the Ottoman Empire. He got the tallest people he could, women and men, and forced them to breed. And he created the Potsdam Giants. So
the Germans have been doing like weird eugenics for the military for a long time.
Right, and this is even weirder than just normal eugenics. He just like tall guys.
Yeah, it was just a weird personal thing for him.
Yeah. And so then people talk about how Napoleon was short, and there's a little context there because compared to the Potsdam Giants, but now he's average. And he did make sure to hunt down and kill a lot of Potsdam Giants. So there's like these little pieces of truth behind really amazing, there were 30-foot Attack of the Titans, kind of things. And same with silicon trees, the idea that there were mushrooms that were growing in this more recent period than we think, because we talk about also carbon dating is off. I mean, all of these things have these really dramatic, extreme versions of the story. The world was created on Thursday, 4004 BC at 9 a.m. That's more likely what it is that carbon dating is inaccurate because, you cannot use carbon dating to measure time as much as instances of volcanic incidents. And so these reactions can also be nuclear. So if you think about the Oklo nuclear volcano, there's a volcano with like 7 supposedly natural nuclear reactors. And, it could be that there's more to it. It could be that it was built by an ancient civilization, but it also just points out objectively that in nature, if there's some uranium and something were to happen, that it will deplete itself, right? So there are events in nature which will change how long ago something looks like it happened. And so we look at things that we think took millions of years, but it might have only been 10,000 years in certain circumstances.
Yeah, and like nuclear bomb tests, I know through carbon dating really far off in those areas because it messed with the radiocarbon decay. So
absolutely. And this is a big issue for the time scale of things. And it's really the thing that's the most interesting about Anatoly Fomenko, who was a Russian chronologist and is a Russian chronologist. He's also a mathematician and a professor. He's really a brilliant mathematician. And if you look at some of his work on other things, you'll see he's not like some sort of flat earther who's into YouTube videos at all. What he has found is that there is a trend of nomadicism in humanity, and states are migratory, or they were up until the period of the last 100 years with Cecil Rhodes, where states were redefined. Before that, Weber defined a state as a legitimate source of violence. And up to this point now, state is also defined as a resource-bound economy and the legitimate source of violence.
Right.
So you've got the Jewish migration, which you also have the Gypsy Romani diaspora out of India. And these things start to also change once they hit Turkey or Istanbul, or at the time Constantinople. And Constantinople is where the Christians and the Muslims and the Jews and the Bogomils and all sorts of different groups were. And we think about these crusades as being, the Christians against the Muslims, but it's more nuanced than that, right? There are crusades against Protestants. There are crusades against certain kinds of Christians.
The Cathars, the Eastern Crusades over in Belarus and Poland and all that.
You have Paulatians that are saying that the word of God, the word of Paul is the word of God. Like you have to believe that this letter to the city of Ephesia is like the literal word of God. And they're like, wait, I thought we were saying we all kind of vibed. Spain had the Cordoba Caliphate, the Umayyad Caliphate. People were able to interact on a level that is more nuanced than we can really understand today, because we think religions are these closed down paradigms, and they really were monopolized at that point. And they started burning a lot of books in the Spanish Inquisition, right? So they destroyed all the records of what had existed. So we think of this Dark Ages, which is crazy because it was this bright period where there was literally people working with electricity. We do have Ibn Firnas has texts about how he was experimenting, rudimentary experiments, which the Hellfire Society used, which where Benjamin Franklin got a lot of his ideas for playing with prototypical electricity. They had a water wheel that was spinning, that they had experimented, and they were discovering alternating current. There was all sorts of stories that were coming out of Cordoba in Spain. And they had gypsies, like Romani had been hired because they brought, after the Ghaznavid Empire had conquered parts of West India, the Chennai and the Romani escaped through into Europe. And so for the last 1,000 years, you'll find stories of the Black Sophia, the Gypsy Madonna, or you'll see the Saint Gypsy chief or soldier. I forget the word, not soldier, but battalion chief, because they were using the Romani as a group that weren't part of their religion as a military mercantile to keep in charge, to keep the power at bay. So all this is happening while the Ottoman Empire, Mehmet, is moving further towards control over the Janissaries. And so that's the entire coastline of Yugoslavia, or Croatia and Serbia and Montenegro. And they're taking their kids, and then they're training them how to be Janissaries. So they're becoming more and more in line with the Ottoman Empire. And eventually the Ottoman Empire takes over Constantinople, and in the process forces out which become these Paulatian Catholics. And eventually they say, well, we're just going to ignore the Istanbul Empire, and we're going to just let them, we're going to pretend what they're doing doesn't exist. We'll have our own calendar. And then whenever we go into a place, we'll conquer the place and just erase the history as best we can. And by doing, not just erasing, like bleeding it into our own culture, so that their saints become their gods become saints, everything like that. So there's a huge erasure of culture. And then there's a bunch of documents that prove this. For instance, the Pseudo-Isidorian decrees, or Catholic documents, which were forgeries produced in the last few centuries, in the 16th century, I believe, or maybe the 19th century, but probably could have been as far as the 16th. They're supposed to be from the 9th century or the 6th century. And they say that priests can't have kids, they have to be celibate, all in order to take over these areas where it's been essentially a monster, where priests have children and then they're part of the local community. So all of this stuff starts to erase the culture, and then they start taking children. And this is probably where, like, some of the stuff you have heard of, the foundling trains. It's not that they were growing Cabbage Patch Kids and like delivering them by train. It's that they were removing huge populaces of orphans, and not just orphans, but kids who'd been stolen from their parents. 20,000 kids from Russia to Canada, 50,000 kids from Canada back to Russia, 100,000 kids from Argentina into New York. And the Catholic Church is doing a lot of this, and they have all sorts of excuses, but they're saying that they need to bring these kids to other places. So they're forgetting their whole culture. They're erasing their whole culture. And simultaneously they're building this new calendar. So they have the Gregorian calendar. And by the time the 19th century rolls around, it's been divided for so long that the Russians haven't been using it. They've been using the Muslim calendar, the Hebrew calendar. They've been using the former Constantinople Ottoman calendar, but the events don't line up. And so Anatoly Fomenko starts finding out that there's stories of this king to this king, 12 kings in a row, birthday to death day. They're the same as these kings' birthdays to death days, and that they're duplicates, and that there's whole sections of calendars of the chronology which are just duplicated because they didn't know what to do with it, and that it justified a lot of Catholicism saying, well, we've been around for 1,000 years, you know, rather than 100 years. So the idea that the last 2,000 years of history, a lot of it's actually happened over the last maybe 1,000 years of history. Like certain things that we think of as happening in the 17th century, or I'm sorry, happening in the 7th century, actually happened in the 17th century. So not everything, but there are certain kinds of things that are mistranslated between the East and the West calendars. And that's a big one. So the idea that Jesus was probably only 1,000 years ago, things like that. I'll give you a second to pause and think about that.
It was a lot. That was a lot to digest. Okay. So I think just to really quickly establish one thing, I want to roll back a little bit. When it comes to to all of this, the version we've been hearing involves Atlantis and Irish and Hebrew being connected languages, and obviously orphan trains and the Freemasons and the Knights Templar and all of that. So I guess if you could tell me sort of where your version of this differs from sort of that more, I guess, extremist version is the way to put it.
I think the problem is really just nuance. So it's not that like any spin on it is exactly wrong if you're saying that at one point there was a confederated trade agreement between lots of parts of the world, and that Atlantis might be one of Herodotus' accounts of one of these sovereign autonomous city-states, and that Japan and the United Kingdom are remnants. Similar to Krakatoa in Indonesia is a great example of that. One of the things is that you look at Freud's analysis of Asarsef and Moses, and the idea that Moses is Akhenaten, and I think that's a big part of this. So the idea of the Jewish exodus into Odessa. So if out of Egypt you have, first off, someone who's raised Egyptian, so they're raising up from the basket. Like Moses doesn't know the Jewish culture; he can't speak Hebrew, and he's raised Egyptian.
Akhenaten's reign.
Right. Please do. This is worth it. Go to the Wikipedia and check out Akhenaten's reign, and you'll see it's 13th century BC. And this Moses, look up Moses, and on the Moses Wikipedia, they'll say, well, it's not generally historically regarded, but if it were historically regarded, it'd be at the same time as Akhenaten.
Akhenaten for me, there's a very specific reason that I was curious about that one. Because Akhenaten, if I remember, Akhenaten is before Ramses. So because that would throw a wrench.
There's a couple of things here. So first off, Moses is Ramses. So Ra, son of Ra. That's what Moses means. And so there's several Ramses. The other thing is that Akhenaten is bringing up the Atenism. So he's got this one god in this henotheistic religion, and he's bringing the priests out of Asarsef. The other thing is several generations prior, about 100 years prior, you have Yuya. Yuya is a Semitic priest who took over during this major famine and drought, and is often credited with being Joseph from the Technicolor Dreamcoat, which explains a lot of this idea that they came into Egypt, they became very popular, very powerful in the community. And then Akhenaten was pushed in because they wouldn't allow them into the royal family. So he's raised by them, and eventually it's found out. But at that point, he's Stockholm Syndrome. He's not raised Hebrew. He can't speak the Hebrew language. And so there's a mass exodus that has to take place, and a cultural erasure, which they cannot complete with Akhenaten or Moses. He has to be removed from the equation. From there, they go through Turkey to Odessa. And then from Odessa, they go across Europe. And there's, of course, 12 to 13 tribes. So there's also the African Beta Israelites in Ethiopia. And there's tons of tribes of Israel. So the idea that they've gone all over the world, I don't think is super questioned necessarily. But the other thing is that, well, what do we consider the Hebrew language? Because it was pretty much the way we know the Hebrew language today was invented in the last 100, 200 years. From scholars studying Arabic and Yiddish, right? So you've got the remnants of Hebrew that has lasted into Germany and into Ukraine.
Well, we do also have the Dead Sea Scrolls and a number of ancient manuscripts with Hebrew on it.
Right, but again, you're also saying then that you trust the Dead Sea Scrolls, which are relatively recent finds. And then if you're looking at ancient Hebrew writing, it's not written in like the modern Hebrew script. The modern Hebrew script is invented in the
Yeah,
last 100
well,
years. It's a Proto-Aramaic. It's maybe
I wouldn't
Arabic.
call it necessarily invented, but was definitely
Well, a lot. You can actually.
Hebrew was basically like Latin, where it was a language that we, you know, the only people who were able to speak it for a long time were priests of that religion. But I'm trying to sift through some stuff here.
I would say Eliezer Ben Yehuda is worth looking into, and the methods that he employed to create. Like there are videos from like Israel that will talk. You know, they're proudly talking about how hard it was to recreate Hebrew, and it was essentially, you know, a revival, but they had to use Arabic as the root to justify a lot of the words. So they're not sure exactly half of modern Hebrew if it's anything like what ancient Hebrew was per se.
Well,
there are things about the grammar, but even in Israel, they're using more and more Arabic in Hebrew, and so it's hard to say, okay, well, this is what ancient Hebrew was or is, you know. But if you go to parts of the world where they use Ugaric languages, there are interesting similarities. Particularly, there's the Bach. You've heard of the Bach saga?
Yes, it's not within my area of study, but yeah.
Right. I mean, it's weird. It's about a weird guy who was like, you know, the crazy son of a sailor who had a child with his own daughter. You know, like everything about the dude's crazy. But he supposedly has this like ancient Viking history of the, you know, pre-reset world, and the idea that we go through resets, and that at some point out of the ice or something, there are multiple hominids that converge. And I think that's where you know it gets really hard for people because like, wait, is it not just Adam and Eve? Are you talking about Bigfoot? But what I find strange about that is
funny. That's what I was about to say.
Real quick, I'm curious about that one particular point. Is because I don't think that's something I've heard before. Is the idea of hominids converging? Is that an example of convergent evolution, essentially over a period of time?
Absolutely. Well, and even perhaps in more of an instant. So the idea, so this is what's interesting. For a long time, okay, you have the 1619 Project as this sort of antithesis of Eurocentric history, and there's a lot of problems with Eurocentric history. We could admit that, right? Like the Piltdown Man is a fake, right? You know what I'm talking about?
That one, that's not what I've heard of.
So the Piltdown Man is a British skeleton. After they found the Neanderthal Valley remains, the British got really upset because they thought, wow, what if Germans found the evolution of man? This is a big deal. So they took a bunch of monkey teeth and pig teeth and put it into a monkey or an ape skull, and then they buried it in Piltdown, England. And so we found the evolution of the Piltdown Man up until about 10 years ago. And even if you ask some teachers today, they don't know it's a fake. But it's a fake, and everybody should know that. And if you look up Piltdown Man, it's on Wikipedia as a fake. So we're moving quickly. Yeah. But the British Eurocentricity was a problem, and so the 1619 Project is kind of interesting, but it's flawed in the same way. So the answer I found was Tartaria. Try to find out what the original history was and what is modern science. And so right now, if you go to like UCSC's genomics labs, they'll tell you there is no human genome anymore. We don't, that's a misnomer that always was. There are convergent gene flows of different kinds of hominids. We have Neanderthal, we have Denisovan, we have Homo floresiensis, we have Homo sapiens sapiens, Homo erectus, and there's actually gene flow in between.
One in South Africa too that they just revised to believe that it might be about the same age as Homo sapiens sapiens, which is interesting. It's it starts with an N. It's driving me nuts. But there's a couple things that I also still wanted to ask about, because one of the things I saw a lot of in this was Egypt, and a lot of that I was reading Donnelly, and obviously Donnelly was writing before we found any of the pre-pyramid tombs. Donnelly was writing before we found
I think it's also important to remember a lot of the tombs were forgeries. I mean, not that everything is. I'm not one of those, but just to understand that near the end there, they were desperate to find stuff, and so they were hiding some stuff.
I won't lie that there's definitely been some archaeology that's been a little less found and a little more planted.
We ought to reanalyze everything. Yes.
But so just some specific examples that came up, I guess, that I would like to bring up, because I'm curious about what your response would be regarding the Moses and Ramses connection that you built. In Exodus, there's a very clear passage where it says that the Jews helped build the cities of Pithom and Pi Ramses, and then that the Exodus happens after that with Moses leading it. And so the Pharaoh who that means this has to be the latter half of the 13th century.
I connected with Amarna, right? And
Uh-huh.
I think that Amarna was the city that was built and then also destroyed. I also think that there's a little bit of a discrepancy in the Akhenaten calendar, when things were built. I think things might be off by about 60 years.
Okay. But but specifically with the Ramses being Moses issue, because
Or Akhenaten
okay.
being Moses.
Akhenaten is Moses, but then even if Akhenaten is off by 60 years, that still puts him long before the Exodus.
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. Yeah, it's about 60 years forward, probably. And then so Ramsey. Let's look at his timeline. Actually, let me see what you're saying here. Show me what you're saying here.
So my reading of Exodus, the way I date things is based off the mentions of Pithom and Ramses, because those are important cities that we know that they were built during the reign of Ramses II. And then we have the Merneptah Stela, which was discovered. I can't remember exactly when it was discovered, but when it was eventually translated, it says something very interesting, which is that it might be the earliest mention of the term Israel, because it says Israel is laid waste, its seed is barren, I believe is what it says.
That sounds familiar.
And that stela dates to sometime after 1208 BC. And if you read Exodus and you look at the plagues, one of the plagues is a plague of darkness, and there was an eclipse in October of 1207 BC. And then following that, there's some other stuff that kind of makes sense. Like there's an eclipse that happens under Joshua that likely is the one from the 1100s. So when I read that, it basically places that you got Akhenaten is the 1300s BC, and then you have Ramses II, who's a very long reign for most of the 13th century, and then Merneptah, who follows after Ramses II. So for me, when I look at it, that puts Moses as being during the reign of Merneptah, not during the reign of Akhenaten.
Yeah, so I move Akhenaten up. I think so. Basically, the Akhenaten is at 1353 to 1336 versus Moses. It's 1391 to 1271.
I would strongly disagree with that dating for Moses.
Right, exactly. And I'm just saying that's what Wikipedia is saying. And I would move Moses to be closer though to Akhenaten.
Yeah. I would move Moses up almost 200 years.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's exactly what. So that puts him at the same time, just about. And the idea that people were living perhaps to 90 is it helps with the Moses story, because he's supposed to have lived rather long.
It's 120, but the biblical use of numbers is rarely exact.
I'm weirdly for a lot of biblical stuff, though. I take it to the extreme. Like, why not engage the possibility that this is based on some truth, right? And I know a lot of people will say that there's metaphor to, for instance, the Noah's Ark, but I think that you'll find examples of flooding internationally, or global flooding, as well. And this might have led into the ice cap melting or something. So I think it's worth looking into that.
Where we net out on it, and this is another one of those things where it drove me nuts the way that our argument was represented by a certain person who we responded to. But for us, we talk all the time about, or I talk, you film, but about the events of Meltwater Pulse 1b, the end of the Younger Dryas, how if you look at what that was, if you're talking about I think we said 20 meters of sea level rise in. No, it was 60 meters of sea level rise total. 25 of them were in about 100 years.
Yeah.
So if you look at that, the pace at which the water will be rising would very much seem like a flood. And
mud floods fill into that story too, because of the, for instance, wadis in Africa. The idea that parts of the middle of the Sahara from the Taman Rasset were filled with water, and the Mega Chad was not 10,000 years ago, but maybe within the last 1,000 years. There's evidence for that. And so if this was a major rapid drying, as well as the feedback loops, you look at the Aral Sea in Russia, and about 1989, it was diverting off. By now, it's completely dried off because we just diverted about 1 to 10% of it, but it couldn't rain back into itself. So after 40 years, the biggest salt lake in Europe and the world dried itself out completely. So it's very easy to imagine that we dried out the Sahara very recently. And even the word wadi used to mean like water comes and goes, and used to refer to a travel on the water. So even the word has gotten to refer to infrequent water when it used to be the water we always travel on. So all these things have happened. And I think that the other one with the Younger Dryas is that parts of the ice that have melted because of the volcanoes, like you look at the Carolina bays, I think they're called, these giant circles and craters, and they say, well, these look like meteors, but there's no meteors here. And the answer is probably giant ice that have been projectiles of ice that came out from under a pressurized, almost Krakatoa-like event that was in Canada. And these things were talked about. Like the other reason that Tartaria comes up is because this is in Moral and Dogma. Like the Freemasons talked about this hundreds of years ago. But it's interesting because the same stories come up in connection with Randall Carlson or Graham Hancock when they're talking about modern science.
What in Morals and Dogma are you talking about?
Morals and Dogma, which is like
I know what it is. Yeah. Just what are you talking about mentioning Tartaria?
So if you look it up, you get a copy of it in just PDF file or some archive.org. You can type in Tartaria or you can type in Tartars. There's about 11.
Do that. Go on sacredtext.com and look up Morals and Dogma.
There's about 11 mentions of the. There's about 11 mentions of it through the book. It's not just in one spot, but there's a part of it specifically I can remember that talks about how the Tartarians the Tartars have lost. I think the Tartarians is the way he says it. Have lost their rights to their inheritance and their blessing.
This is not a gotcha moment at all. It's just I don't trust online sources all the time.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. I want to pull down my copy.
I want to make sure it's in the print edition too. Is all.
Yeah. I can get the original if you want. You want a first edition to see it?
We have one. We have one at the launch.
Okay. Yeah, it doesn't. Yeah.
So it's...
yeah. So that was the other reason. My grandfather's book mentioned it. I figured it was probably that was one of the early reasons. I was like, okay, so who are these, and are they related to like Ishmael or something? Because the way it talks about the blessing.
There's a website called Sacred Texts.
This one.
Yeah.
I went there first. I couldn't find it.
Yeah, you scroll through there. You go to Freemasonry.
Oh, got it. Okay.
And then it's Morals and Dogma by Albert Pike. But just while we're pulling that one up, there was another thing you said that came up in a lot that I wanted to mention, which was the phantom time hypothesis, new chronology, the idea that years were added or removed to the calendar. I've heard.
I think that should be disconnected from Tartaria. But keep going.
Well, but you did mention.
Oh, you're talking about you mean literally. Like chronology, not like space-time CERN.
Yeah. No. I'm talking about the one that's
changing the calendar.
Changing the calendar. Because I've heard that one come up a lot, and the one that surprised me a little bit was I saw all the things with the letter J being involved in dates, and personally, I think that's very
I watched Indiana Jones. I'm all right with yeah.
Personally,
I'm with you.
I find that one explainable. But what was interesting was I had people bringing up. They were like, "Well, you see events get repeated." That there's an event that shows up in the 700s, like you said, 700s might be the 1700s.
But is that just some woo Terrence McKenna thing where reality repeats itself?
But so I guess what I'm wondering is, like, do you have any examples of some of these chronological moments that you're saying don't make sense in the current chronology?
Sorry, I muted myself. Yeah, okay. I would say, like, if you type in flamenco chronology, like, you can see thousands of examples because Anatolian Flamenco has made a bunch of ones. The ones that come up even on image search are Fomenko. Fomenko.
Is there like a
he does like lines connecting the events. You can if you go to Google Images, you'll see some examples where on one side is like the biblical kingdom of England. On the right side is a dynastical current from the Roman Empire of the 4th to the 5th century AD. Here's another one, the Holy Roman Empire in the 10th, 13th century. Here's the kingdom of Judah in the Bible. And so just the idea that the Catholic version of the Holy Roman Empire calendar is either the original or the duplicate.
Got it.
Which I think is probably it's the original, and that they've changed. That's a whole other thing. If you're going to get into Shakespeare, and De Vere, and Bacon, and the idea that maybe they were working Cecil Rhodes, like Erasmus, that they rewrote parts of the Bible, that can get heavy. I don't know. I mean, I'm not saying that you should necessarily even entertain that.
Yeah, I'm just looking through some of this stuff because it's interesting. If you get stuff he's bringing up. But
he's got a ton of different examples. Some of them are you might be like, okay, so what? Like, what does it matter if the Byzantine Empire is a duplicate of the Anglia kingdom line? Well, it matters because if their whole claim is of controlling the land, is they took it away from these people, and that to be a royal over the United Kingdom, your family have to prove they don't come from England, right? That's basically what it means. Like, because you have to say you come from Solomon or
it's
Muhammad.
Alfred the Great for England is the one that you have to trace back to.
Right, but you still have the Scone Stone, and even going, I mean, you could, there's the Sophia Naturalization Act as well, like trying to avoid anyone who's a member of the Catholic Church. There's the whole Roman Empire.
That one was a result of the Glorious Revolution and the wars between the Catholics of Scotland and the
Which
Protestant
ironically
England.
ended up with Hanover, George was basically a Catholic anyway, so I don't know.
Yeah, I mean,
Secretly.
he was a Lutheran probably. But you know, it's
based. Okay.
yeah.
But you know,
I'm just really quickly
Sure.
curious about looking at these different new chronology things because we've used a couple of these examples in the videos, but I'm not seeing any labeling within like a graph-like structure. Is the purpose of the organization of the lines purely just to fit as much information in certain areas as possible, or is there some like more specific meaning to the line's orientation from that central, you know, splitting line where they like are further out at
yeah,
certain
it's
points
the
or deeper
structure of
in?
the graphic that I think has got us confused.
Yeah.
And I would pull one up on screen, but it would totally screw up the entire setup of the.
Yeah, like I'm wondering, is there a purpose other than fitting as many words as possible within certain areas of it beyond?
I think those are supposed to be timelines of some sort. I'm gonna have to look
yeah,
into
each one of
things.
these points, if you're pointing, I can't see what you're saying, but
Yeah,
if you're pointing to
it's-
points, each point is complementary to another point in history, and they're saying these events have a symmetry to the other events.
Yeah.
And where Terence McKenna might say, "Whoa, dude, if you take mushrooms, events will all synchronize."
Yeah.
Flamenco is saying that actually it looks like the Catholic Church lied, and that's, you know, Occam's razor kind of likely because the Catholic Church lies a lot, and they did.
There's
They
definitely
did.
a lot of examples of the Catholic Church lying. I'm not gonna lie. I won't argue with that. But what sticks out for me, I think that bugs me is the amount of forgery that would have had to happen and the amount of
Oh, yeah.
people that would have had to
It's
be
crazy.
involved.
It almost
in
like
the
they'd have to
forgery.
kill like half of Spain and burn them to death. Yeah, it's almost like the Inquisition
Well,
would have had to go over.
it's not
like
Sp-
12
it's not
crusades.
Spain. It's not Spain or Greece that get me, which I've seen that one a lot because people will be like, oh well, you know, there were religious wars. It's
How about the 80-year war in Holland, the iconoclasm? Which
It's-
one is it? What gets you?
it's the stuff between like it's a lot of these specific events of the medieval period that have to have happened in different
Right.
times from one another. That
Okay,
like
I agree.
one
I think certain
one
things-
must precede the other.
I think there probably are some things like that. Yeah, I don't think every single thing is going to be.
Yeah. So it's I
But
mean
which
I'm
ones?
just-
Which one would come to mind? Right.
I mean I'm trying to find an example that flamenco actually gives as part of the problem, but a lot of these
I think
are
like
just
the
a lot of
the
these are just
Byzantine
names.
Empire. The Byzantine Empire and Roman Empire is an interesting one because we often accredit everything as being part of this Roman history.
Mhm.
But then we have to say, okay, well, that's not real. Let's justify the Byzantine Empire. And as you start to culturally break things up, you realize these things are far more, again, nuanced than we thought they were. There are Africans that consider themselves Carthaginian, Roman conscripted soldiers that would have brought their culture to certain islands. What do we know about a Roman centurion is that he might not have been from Rome. So the whole thing becomes very confusing very quickly. I mean, what we're told is what the winners wanted to be remembered about their legacy.
Does that one look like something you could actually?
Correlation of the medieval Carolingian Empire of the alleged years 681 to 888 and the ancient Third Roman Empire of the alleged years 324 to 527 AD.
Is that something you think would be?
Well, that one's yeah. I mean, that's just confusing. What like, I mean, Charles Martel and Theodosius I just can't be the same person because of the armament, the equipment they were using,
Yeah, I think, and so there's another thing there too, which is that sometimes they're not saying that Charles and Theodosius are the same person, but that sometimes their stories converge, which is another thing that can happen where someone starts telling a myth about somebody because it was a popular myth about a leader. So sometimes the stories get converged, even though there are two different persons.
I mean, I see where you're coming from. I suppose. I'm just trying to look at some of the specifics here. I mean. Okay, but
I mean, there's some,
like
there's
for
some
example,
other...
well, one thing that comes up in here, Odoacer and Louis II weren't even in the same place.
Like, that's another thing that will happen in this is that you'll say, okay, wait, how could this happen here? Well, if this group of people migrated there and they're keeping their stories there, then they're telling the stories of what happened when they were in the former, like, now they're in Little Italy, New York. They used to be in Little Italy, England. They used to be in Little Italy, Italy. You know, kind of a thing. Like they go where they go, and then they keep telling their story.
The reason I picked that one though was deliberate. It's because Charles Martel, Odoacer and Louis II really have nothing in common. One is Gothic from, I mean, that's Eastern German that comes down and ends up in Italy, and the other one is King of the Western Franks.
I mean, they're a little more common than you'd think in the sense that people didn't speak French in France. You know, it was mostly spoken in like Holland and parts of Germany.
Gothic and Frankish were distinct. Like,
yeah, but
they're
they're
distinct.
But also, Gothic doesn't necessarily mean that they were speaking like a Germanic language. They could have easily been influenced by like the Arabs. You know, they could have been Turkic Goths.
But that's why I say Goths is that Gothic did refer specifically to a language group and the people who spoke it.
There's a culture. There's a bunch of different Goths. There's definitely like 6 different Goths that have different languages. Particularly 11,000 words in the Eastern Turkic Goth groups from the Austria. Well, so if you look at the Viennese, the 1539 Viennese siege, there's it's the most bloody war, and you have people digging underground because half of these people were related to Janissaries who spoke Arabic, and Arabic had become a major part of their. So why Austrians drink Turkish coffee? Like, we have such a confusion here because we won't acknowledge that the Arabs were in charge of these people for literally generations.
Well, I wouldn't agree with that necessarily. There's mainstream history very well acknowledges the extent of the Ottoman Empire's rule over
now we do,
Southeastern
but
Europe.
I just mean there was an experience of cultural erasure that took place in the 17th century of Turkic history, of Arabic history.
So I guess one, just to further that though, why are you claiming? I'm trying to figure out how to phrase this, but where is the claim that the Goths were Turkic coming from?
Well, it's not that they're Turkic, but there are Goths in Turkey. There were Goths in Turkey. Like there's a nomadic tribe that existed all across from into Eurasia, all the way into Spain. I mean, the Ladino people are even have Gothic origins, and there's Galatians that have Goths. The Goths had reached Galatia. I mean, there's Berbers that have Goth in them because they were a trading people that went everywhere, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
they ended up in charge of Italy,
right?
And so, in fact, they ended up in Italy and in Spain, both of them.
And I forget, doesn't Odoacer lose?
It's been a while since I
like the
studied.
fall of he loses control of the East, right? Of the Eastern.
Well, no, so it's the other way around. It's that Justinian lost control of. Well, Justinian wasn't the one who lost control. He was the one that tried to regain control. But after the Western Empire falls in 476. The Eastern Empire has a few periods where it tries to do its own reconquista.
And Odoacer comes into power after 476.
Yeah,
right?
Odoacer, I want to say, is the early 500s. I think it's Theodoric who's the one that actually sacks Rome. But I might have it backwards. It might be that Odoacer is the one that sacks Rome and Theodoric is the one that doesn't. Actually, it's right here. Here we go, the medieval Carolingian Empire. Odoacer, yeah, he's forced. Okay, so yeah, Odoacer, I had it mixed up. Theodoric is the one who ends up being king in concert with the Byzantines. But Odoacer sacks Rome in 476. And then Louis II the Western, I don't understand why those two would be connected with one another, I guess is the question I'm having.
I mean, I don't recall exactly, so I haven't read that particular part, but I guess you could say because like he's at the beginning of the is he at the beginning of the Holy Roman Emperor, the August Emperor?
Holy Roman Empire is 800 AD.
Yeah, so 825 to 875. So he's he's like the beginning of the Holy Roman Empire. So after they've lost power and they've lost control of Constantinople, and so he's the first king of this new Holy Roman Empire, or at least
because Byzantium had control of Constantinople at the time. The Romans did.
Arguably, I would say the Ottomans at that point really did have control, and then we wouldn't admit it.
At that point, the Turks weren't even in the Middle East yet. This is where, and this is why I wanted to have a conversation because I'm curious as to
it destroys the whole So the idea that the Byzantine Empire probably is a lie. This is a hard one to swallow. Basically.
But why? What's the evidence that it's a lie? Because we have their artwork, we have their literature. Like,
why would the Arabs destroy it? Why not simultaneously have a culture that existed and then just lie about it?
But it's different from Arabic culture.
Sure, the Arabs had no problem with people having different cultures.
Yeah, but
there's no reason you couldn't have Christianity in Istanbul. There's
I was more talking about their art and their script, their literature, their numerical system. That's why we start using Arabic numerals.
We're using Arabic numerals because there's a confluence there that's coming from the Arabic center of free exchange of ideas. And we wouldn't admit it. Like the Catholic Church wouldn't admit it. And so they had to pretend that there's something else going on the entire time. Well, they couldn't handle
with Arabic
that
numerals,
they weren't in charge.
With Arabic numerals, they just start to kind of crop up and become used over in Spain, and then they naturally make their way over to Italy. We have the documentation.
Yeah,
is why I
but
say
you make it sound really soft. It's like really what it is. Like all of Spain is using crop up. All of Spain is using it because it's part of the Umayyad Empire and the Cordoba Caliphate.
Yeah.
And then what's not burned ends up being used by the elites and like certain fraternal orders, which is awesome, by the way, because if there's no internet, you want to join a men's lodge that has a library. Like I'm for it. But there's a reason why people think it's just sort of happened where no, this was a hugely prevalent culture and it's been erased. It's been completely erased.
Okay.
And it's not that incredible. Like the idea that we're saying, okay, it's like UFOs or anything like that. No, this is just an erasure of a culture that was beaten in the 15th, 16th century. And by 1666, I mean, you also see this because the British start to make wars with the Moroccans. The racism starts to occur. Like there's no racism against Moors until the British Arabic War. At that point, Shakespeare and things start to produce this anti-Moorish sentiment in Britain. But there's no like historical anti-Moorish sentiment in 12th century England, right?
But why would there be anti-Moor sentiment in England?
There wouldn't. Well, there could have been if there was a reason, but there wasn't. It doesn't occur until the 16th century.
Really, really quickly, just because I am now lost in the weeds, and I know that everybody else watching is. You know, then that's my job here is to make sure that we don't get too deep into it so that people can actually follow. Remind everybody surface level, what specifically, like this point that we're discussing right here and having like a little kind of debate about back and forth, what exactly are we talking about here?
Right now, the conversation is about the situation with Spain being controlled by North African and Arabic forces from 732, I believe, is the year that they finally boot out the French and their allies who were trying to retake it.
And we got there by talking about the Byzantines versus the Ottomans or Turks. What was so what was the contention there between what you're referring to with your historical knowledge versus what you're kind of referring to with your, you know, understanding of these theories of this history kind of being, you know,
it's kind of, I think right now we're kind of just on the scope of the Muslim world.
Okay.
Right. And you know, of course, everything in Islam ties back to Arabic because the Quran is written in Arabic, and technically, in order to read the Quran, you must read it in Arabic.
And this comes back to the differentiation between Louis II and
just the timelines, and I was going more at the material culture angle at the moment.
Okay. Because I know we were starting to get very specific about things that didn't have a lot of context. I just wanted to bring that back to the surface so people knew where we were going.
Fair enough. Fair point. Yeah, I guess I'm trying to, but I'm just trying to understand, I guess, where this is coming from. I think you
kind of hit on it by talking about the Arab cultural aspect of it, because we also have, you know, I think the way some people look at Christianity, they see the Westboro Baptists, and that's what Christianity is. That some people see Islam that way. They're like, oh yeah, Islam. It's like they blow up buildings. That's not really what Islam is, you know. And if you go back deep enough, it's a pretty broad and philosophically deep religion. One of the persons I interviewed on my channel is a girl from Tartaristan, which is a country. It's got Tartar in the name, and they are pretty Muslim, but she's blonde. She looks kind of like you guys, blonde, blue-eyed looking. She's kind of into yoga and stuff, and she's a Muslim, but it's so intellectual and into architecture and spirituality. It's not like the recruited soldiers of wars who've been converted and turned into the religion. So Islam's changed a lot as well. And even looking at like I think it's called the Uthman Quran, which was found in Kazakhstan. There's differences even that have changed in Islam. Islam used to be a far more open-minded, and the idea that we're not supposed to look at God as a man, but man is like this arabesque, like God is this Vitruvian metaverse kind of thing, like a broader aspect. So we've lost a lot of our understanding of what that even means. And just that also, it wasn't that you had to worship Muhammad. It was that, you know, kind of almost, I don't want to say it's like the Mormons, but they were open to the Jews and the Christians at first, until it got to the point where the Umayyad Empire realized that they could collect a tax. And they're like, this is great. We'll be the only Muslims in our empire, and then everyone else will be taxed. And so there's reasons why we look at Islam differently also. But it wasn't always this hyper controlling religion. I think it at one point was trying to be a more broad philosophy.
So I guess when then would you place Islam in the chronology?
So probably within the last, basically it's about 400 years old.
400 years old.
Sounds pretty crazy. I get you there. Actually, hard for me even to believe. I mean, more on the skeptic
Mhm.
train of reality. But if you were to follow the flamenco timeline,
Uh-huh.
then essentially it would be that it's the way we look at Islam today is about 400 years old. However, ask that question again, and I might say Islam is the oldest religion, that all religions were at one point kind of a Vedic, Islamic, that there might be a primordial religion that
Mhm.
existed, and that things have kind of divided out of that. I think,
Mhm.
but what we call Islam today, the way it's practiced, I think is relatively new. The same with Christianity, though, like the Bible, the King James Bible, the way it's practiced today, not the same as Pope Gregory's, even,
Mhm.
and then go beyond that. So a lot of things are pretty recent in the way we practice them.
Mhm. All right. So I guess the next question I have would follow would be the Crusades.
Right. And so
Because
the
then that
Crusades happened 1,000 years ago.
but
And
how could the
that
crusade but see that's what I mean though. How could the Crusades happen 1,000 years ago but Islam is only 400 years old?
So the Crusades happened before modern Islam, the
Uh-huh.
way it exists now, is not ancient, the prototypical Islamic, Vedic, Tartarian religion. Okay. So this
Mhm.
Tartarian religion that existed, and Jesus, Yeshua, is alive 1,000 years ago, according to this flamenco timeline.
Mhm.
And then he's killed. And after that, there's huge wars, right? And there's even in the at the time of Jesus, people saying, "Hey, very soon there's going to be kind of Armageddon like end of days kind of
Mhm.
times," and that happened then. It happened 1,000 years ago, and that after there's been so many crusades, few centuries later, nobody remembers really the past because they burned all the libraries except for the ones that are controlled by very small groups of people. So it makes it a lot harder to remember the past before that. And then even beyond that, in the 1600s, 1666, more of it's destroyed until by like the 19th century during the Napoleonic period, 1811, 1812, there's no remnants really of the former civilization, except for a few pieces which are controlled still by, these elite groups.
Mhm.
Not necessarily the World's Fair rebuild kind of
Mhm.
stuff, but for instance, the what's it called? Is it not the Eiffel Tower, the in New York City, that tower with the point. What's it called?
There's several of those.
The Empire State
The Empire
Building?
State Building?
The Empire State Building. So the Empire State Building, the obelisk point
Mhm.
on the top is
Mhm.
supposedly from Tartaria, but it was put on top of a new building that was built, right?
Uh-huh.
So these are the kinds of things where it's like there are ancient structures, or maybe not, but ancient in the sense that they're prehistory.
Mhm.
So history is erased rather recently,
Do you have
and
some of the
that
details on that specific story, just out of
Yeah, I'm
curiosity?
we're yeah,
I don't have
that's
I don't have anything on the Empire State Building right this second because I didn't
Mhm.
think about it. I'm sorry, but I
It's all
could
good.
probably get you
I'm just
stuff on our Discord.
trying
And
to see.
there's a lot of things because people will look at a building and be like, "Oh, this must be like 1,000 years old." It's like, well, no, a lot of buildings are not. Like in Indiana, 1,000 years old or something like that.
Mhm.
But there are probably underground areas. Like the Mormons were looking across Utah for a lot of crazy things, and if you
Mhm.
go across Deseret, you'll find star forts and different things. So I
Mhm.
do think that there's more that is here, but I think a lot of it was destroyed. And you look at like the Civil War or the War of Northern Aggression, you look at Sherman, and they destroyed a lot of the South, and so
Mhm.
it's hard to say really like how much is left if there was anything anyway, right? But you will find certain places where like the telegraph machine is a machine that they used during the railroad period to swing a pen, and an electrical signal would tell a pen somewhere else to swing, and it could draw the picture, and you could
Mhm.
essentially have a fax, right?
Mhm.
So this machine's an interesting one because certain fraternal orders had them. It goes back to the 17th century. Caselli thinks he got it from a Arabic bazaar in Holland. And then beyond that, there are people talking about it into Hero's steam engine period. So
Mhm.
how far back do these machines go?
Mhm.
And from there, there will be people saying, "Oh, well, they must have had UFOs and flying saucers and all stuff."
Yeah.
It's like, no, but Hero steam engine is interesting, right? The Library of Alexandria is interesting. What technology did they have? Like, are we going to look at like these gear mechanisms and try to wonder, were they more prevalent than that, or
Mhm.
are we going to assume that things were kept hidden always? Like the idea that a Freemason didn't tell the world about a secret he had, that makes sense. It could
Mhm.
be that there was just no history, but could it be also that there was a community like today, people using this technology and we can't see it because it's wireless? I mean, there's reasons why you have to change the perspective we have and reanalyze everything we assume, and not presume that we're the highest form of history, of civilization, of biology, of evolution. Right.
All right.
Sorry, I look like I exhausted you. I don't know if I took you anywhere.
I'm just doing. I'm just trying to, in my head, like follow it.
If you don't have an immediate question, I do.
Sure, go.
Yeah. This is dependent on what your thoughts are on it in general, but one of the contentions that has been puzzling me to some extent is the challenging of the World's Fair's architectures, specifically with the issue of the temporary nature of the construction of a lot of these buildings and, you know, structures in general. And I was wondering if you have any knowledge or understanding of that point on the Tartaria narrative, and explain why there is that suspicion about that explanation.
Well, I think the main reason is because no one goes to Burning Man. Because if you go to Burning Man, you know that's not that weird for the elite to build something and burn it down in a day. That's like literally what, I mean, you look like you like history. Who's the Roman centurion who built a bridge and burnt it down behind him, you know?
Oh my God, I actually know who you're talking about. And it wasn't, it's not Varus. That's going to drive me nuts.
That's great. I love driving people crazy. So if that's the reason, it could have been a worse way. But so I'll think of D.F. Griffith, who made Intolerance in 1914. He's just gonna struggle.
Yeah, look up to him.
Look it up for him.
Now I gotta know, because I know who you're talking about, and I'm like,
so my thought about like the Mormons, for instance, showing up and rebuilding Deseret is that they're aware that there was something here. They believe that there's something here. There's pieces to use here, but there's a lot of things that are knocked down, right? And so I think that putting things together, showing people this new world they wanted to build. I mean, more objectively, it doesn't matter, because they're trying to create this new world culture. They wanted a culture that was American and neoclassical, and so they invented it to an extent. And it's not Tartarian, regardless. Even if it was Tartarian stuff, they're not telling you this history of it. It's very Manly P. Hall, right? There's the symbols for the initiated to understand, and for the novices to look at and not understand. So, but you would look at Hollywood and how they can make a fake thing look real, and how they can how today museums are hiring Hollywood props people to fill in the blanks of these museums and say, wow, look, we found this one piece of shingle of ceramic and we duplicated it. So I think there's something there that they were able to put together very quickly. And there were a lot of fake things, but there's also, of course, a lot of real things, right? There are real statues that were brought in. And if you go to San Francisco, you can find some of the San Francisco exhibit still in the lawn of Nancy, or not lawn, but the estate of Nancy Pelosi, right? In her home, she has one of the statues, or two of the statues in the garden area that were in the World's Fair, and they're not made of stucco. Like there were actual statues there as well. So one of the things that's kind of weird is they had what's her name, Helen Keller was the only person allowed to touch the World's Fair, which I always thought was like, that's kind of ironic and sad.
Yeah.
Because then what's she thinking? What's she telling people? It's like she's telling people that communism is the answer. Yeah, okay, like whatever. Great translator she had.
Oh my God, was she a communist?
Well, she was probably a vegetable that the translators exploited and lied and said that she was saying all these things she probably wasn't saying. She's probably like trapped by these horrible people.
I will admit I was not always skeptical of the Helen Keller thing, but while explaining to him how ridiculous the conspiracy theory that Helen Keller wasn't actually what they said she was, I kind of realized that. I was like, wait a second, 19 months old when she went blind and deaf?
I remember this specifically because we were packing up your apartment to move.
And it took us from the door of my apartment to the door of the elevator.
Yes, and then all of a sudden you were like, wait a second. And then you came back into the apartment, and then you looked at your mother and you said, why did you lie to me about Helen Keller?
I remember that.
So I think we should unite on our mistrust and our skepticism, and not just of Helen Keller, but also the idea that history-wise, you know a lot of history, and the same reason that I was interested in Tartaria was that I was like, I know some things about history, maybe not as much as you, and I want to know more, but the things I know aren't jiving with the things from the East, and I'm starting to learn more and more Eastern history.
Well, so that was like the last thing I wanted to ask about, though, was the Chinese kept records too.
Right. and the Jesuits went over there.
So
Look how well China turned out.
But so the claim then is that the Jesuits fabricated Chinese history?
Jesuits fabricated a lot of history. So after they're excommunicated yes, let's start with that. The answer is yes. And you can go and you can look at the Tartaria Bellicum. By the way, at the beginning of Star Trek Enterprise, when they play that song, Deep Faith of the Heart, you can see it says Tartarium Bellicum on the Earth globe right at the very beginning of the thing, which I love. But Tartarium Bellicum is this book from the 15th century where the Jesuits go into Tartaria and they start saying, well, we're going to break up this area. This is this group of people. These are the Manchurians. And they start dividing up and putting certain people in power. And then there's this freaking crazy flu, not the Manchurian flu that happens in the beginning of the 20th century, a whole other flu in the 1600s.
Well, what do you mean they're going in and they're breaking them up?
Well, so there's groups of different tribes. There's like 500 different, I think is it 300 different languages?
A lot of different Tartar tribes.
And they're starting to do the same thing that Rhodes did in Africa. Like they're getting power to some groups and some other people, and then they're destroying both groups, and they're consolidating by destroying these tribes. And by the time the Jesuits, I think by the 1800s, the 200 languages have been destroyed, and by today there's only 30 left in China, right?
What's the evidence that the Jesuits were putting people in power?
So, well, it's kind of funny, but it's kind of like the Jedi, like the Jesuits go in and they manipulate. That's their whole mode, and I don't want to accuse Jesuits of poisoning people.
But what was the evidence that they did it?
So, all right, let's put it this way: the Jesuits in the 17th century were excommunicated by the Catholic Church and suppressed because they were accused of doing this. Right? The Pope, the King John of Portugal, they tried to assassinate him twice. And so after that, he banned all the Jesuits in Portugal, and then the Vatican banned all the Jesuits. And then Catherine the Great held up some Jesuits in Belgium, I think, for a while, for like 50 years. And then they engineered a Franciscan into power who became a pope. And then they dug up the body of the pope who had excommunicated the Jesuits, and they excommunicated the corpse of that pope, so that anything that he'd said was just instantly, they could burn it, and they just burned everything. You know how we have, like, there was the prohibition of alcohol, and now there's not no, they just erased it like it never happened. And the Jesuits usurped power after the Jesuit suppressions, like 1790 or something like that. But it's confusing because we don't really know, because they literally burned all the freaking books from when they were suppressed until they got back, right? So that's the thing. It's not me saying the Jesuits did this. It's everyone saying the Jesuits did this.
But then how would the Jesuits be controlling the narrative in the UK and Sweden and Norway?
At which point? And also not necessarily.
Well, if you're saying that the Jesuits did this in I think you said the late 1700s?
Yeah. Yeah, well,
but then
by that point, because 1500 is when the Tartaria Bellicum is written.
Okay, so
Fire of London 1666 kind of destroys most of the records that the English have. And Charles III, is it third? So after, so you've got Cromwell. But then we would let's not forget, we just had the King of England killed, Cromwell put in power, Lord Protectorate removed, Charles II out of Holland, which was part of the Cordoba Caliphate anyway, who's a secret Catholic, closet Catholic, come into power. So don't tell me it's so confusing that the Jesuits could have done that.
But the English were Protestant.
Except doesn't matter because Charles was a lying closeted Catholic.
Well, so I don't think Charles lied about being Catholic.
He did. He pretended he wasn't a Catholic.
Well, yeah, he was like, I'm not.
And then on his deathbed, he got baptized.
But that's my point, though, is like that's just one of the kings, because the king who made England Protestant wasn't Charles.
Yeah, but you gotta think it doesn't even matter. It's just that historical period. You've got from Cromwell to New England, Fire of London 1666, erasure of history. Like it's a New England after that point. And it's not what it used to be. It's Scotland's even not Scotland after that.
But we do have
every
manuscripts.
Language is gone.
We have manuscripts that are older than that, though.
Sure, that's true. But those are English manuscripts, and they're not. And okay, so you could say like the Cotton Codex, which has Beowulf in it, talks about Tartaria as well. I mean, there's definitely books about Tartaria, but like it's labeled that.
It's
called Tartaria.
Wait, you're saying there's a book that mentions book from the time of Beowulf that mentions Tartaria.
The Cotton Codex is a collection of books, right? Because they put books together.
Yeah.
And so the Cotton Codex includes Beowulf the Gospel of Nicodemus and of Saint Christopher, where Jesus goes into hell, the harrowing of hell, and it has some visit to Tartaria from like the 8th or 9th century. Right, the Cotton Codex is where Beowulf is found at this point, but it's a collection of books. But so there talk about Tartaria, talk about the East. It is kind of a hyperbole.
It uses the word Tartar.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to look into that because as far
and you
as
saw morals in Dogma also earlier.
Well,
right?
I have it pulled up. I don't think we ever got to look it up. But
you can
try
you
and
can go
find
there.
It
says like Warsaw can no more be
look
harder
up,
than Venice.
If you look
page
up
19, page 19 is the first mention of it.
Page 19. Okay.
Yep. Warsaw can no more be Tartar than Venice can be Teutonic. You go to page 162 after that.
Well, and it also might be that my version is printed differently.
Which would be based if they like tried to hide the thing.
Well, no, it's just
interesting. Come on,
font sizes.
What word are we specifically?
Font sizes and footnotes and illustrations. Tartar.
Yeah. 162 also, page 19 is the first one.
Okay. Warsaw can no more be Tartar than Venice can be Teutonic. Okay.
Right. Lingering near these helps 162 to refuse to pass further on, so the unadventurous nomad in the Tartarian wild keeps his flock in the same close crop circle, which I think is not a crop circle, but it's great that they use it that way.
Why not? Why would we not? Why would we not assume he's talking about one of the Tartar Khanates that are recorded as existing at the time?
We're not. I'm not saying we're not.
Oh, okay. Yeah. I'm just saying because I mean, I think
it's
a little late for the Kazan Khaganate, I think, but.
And then the Tukti Shlomo in Tartary, I think, is one of the more interesting references on page 237 or 235. 235, sorry. It talks about the Persians, Celts, Scythians, Scythians, and it talks about Tukti Shlomo. And I don't know, Tukti Shlomo is someone we're still trying to find out about.
What chapter is that?
Oh, I don't know. Page 235 is, let me see where the chapters are. No idea. Sorry. Probably like this way into it.
Do you have the page pulled up? What's the header? What's the header of the page?
World in miniature. And so the whole world was one grand temple. The most ancient temples were roofless, and therefore the Persians, the Celts, the Scythians strongly disliked the artificial covered edifices. Cicero says that Xerxes burned the Grecian temples, and on express ground that the whole world was the magnificent temple and habitation of the supreme deity. Macrobius. Oh, am I going to get in trouble for this, by the way?
No, I don't think so. But I mean, that seems to tie into Zoroastrianism.
Right.
Which would make sense.
I think Zoroastrianism is the, because I don't want to say Islam was the ancient religion. Like Zoroastrianism might be closer to it, but Islam just kind of means...
Zoroastrianism is very likely a development out of the early Indo-European religion that the Yamnaya culture would have had, but...
Agreed. And I think it has kind of become... you could say like the Druze even have a kind of a similar belief as well, but we still to this the idea of the fire ritual though that the Olympics we still use that.
My issue is when Druids come up is
sorry, Druze. D-R-U-Z-E.
Okay, yeah. I thought you said Druids,
no,
and I was
Druids,
we don't know much about what they were up to at all.
I'm waiting for the Jesuits to publish those books, but yeah, apparently, supposedly, you can get access to some of the Druid texts from the Vatican libraries now online. I haven't seen them.
I would distrust anybody who says that because the Druids didn't have texts.
Right. Okay. Fair enough.
that's my. When stuff like that comes up, I'm always very skeptical of it because I'm like, wait a second. One of the facets of Druidism was they didn't write things down.
I had these two rocks, and I was reading it with a hat over my head, and God, I can't do a Mormon thing. Never mind.
No, that was a good one. Ooh, all right. Well, I mean, that's definitely elucidates a much less out there version, because one of the things that we were struggling with.
That is so flattering, dude. I want the whole world to know he just called me less crackpot. Crackpot.
Looking at the one we were covering, he's talking about ancient Atlanteans landing in Ireland 13,000 years ago, and
we didn't even really get to do look. We should talk more, honestly.
Yeah.
You want to come on my channel and you want to talk about actual history, we can do that.
Sure.
Because the idea is to get into real history and find out if there were lies there. I love doing this with the Civil War. There's tons of stories that we find out later are not what actually happened. The same thing with the Gulf War. And history is full of fake news. So we can go through that, and you can check your 3 or 4 different stories against each other.
Yeah.
And we can find out what really happened.
I'm definitely going to take a look at that because I'm curious now to see, you know, what's
Flamenco,
and I'm sure, because I looked into some of his other stuff.
You're more likely to find the truth than someone who's just like, oh yeah, dude, UFOs in Tartaria, bro. Like, I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, there's probably really be open-minded.
Oh yeah.
Are you gonna be able to handle it if you find out that the flying ancient aliens, Hindu UFOs that really existed? Could you handle it? Right?
I can handle it, but I would certainly be confused.
Yeah, just question. Just never stop questioning.
But you know, I do think that's, you know, I think it's a very interesting theory, and I would honestly be willing to like talk about working on this in a way to like actually get to the bottom of things.
Yeah, get down to the WTF.
But yeah, because
Incarnation will be the name of that series.
Because for me, I mean, we've done videos on the possibility that Atlantis was real, and that, you know, maybe Bigfoot's a different hominid or something like that.
Oh, we're on the same wave. I totally think we have evidence of there being different kinds of hominids, and some of them interacted at the same time that we've existed. That's enough of a thing there. And I totally think that what was the other one you just said? That was great.
Bigfoot is a different hominid.
No, right before that one, I agreed with that one too. But Atlantis. Yeah. So Atlantis is interesting because you're saying, are you okay with the idea that we might not be the peak civilization, or that we might have lost some kind of civilization?
I will say I take a much more conservative take on Atlantis, which is that it was maybe Copper Age, but like my version of it,
the Paleolithic period was before the Bronze Age, so it checks out. That's crazy that you could have copper before the Bronze Age without electrolysis.
Yeah.
So I'd love to look more into Atlantis as well, but I think Atlantis might be just somebody, like the way someone is describing a large lizard, they describe dragons, or a large bird attacking people.
Yeah, I think we're probably very much on the same page regarding Atlantis for the most part. But I do want to, because it's already 9:11 p.m. I want to take us over to super chats.
Never forget.
Yeah. Oh my God. So now we're gonna transition over to super chats. I see we got a whole bunch of them in here. We'll try and get through as many of them as possible, but
we'll read live the whole time. I never agree that you could show this to other people.
But yeah, I mean, is there a time that you have to be?
No.
Okay, cool.
I'm here.
So yeah, we'll cut it off at 10 at the very latest then. But yeah, if you want to.
Sure. So do we want to just run through all the ones that have come through, or do we want to prioritize questions?
I mean, how many are there?
There's like 10.
Then for now, let's just go through the ones that are there.
Sounds good. Kellen, the official data for 9.99, said Istanbul was Constantinople. Now it's Istanbul, not Constantinople.
I still refer to it. I still refer to it as Constantinople. I refuse to acknowledge Istanbul.
See, you're part of the Jesuit conspiracy right there.
I'm a Freemason. Which one is it?
Man, which one am I? Order of the Pug. Look them up right now. Yeah.
Speaking of orders involving dogs, Archie, come here.
He's been at our feet. The inability for us to move the whole time.
I realized that I did not show everybody the boy yet, and they all do.
What a lovely little archetype of Sirius, the constellation.
Yeah, he's fantastic.
I would make a cryptocurrency out of that dog. Not out of the dog, but in honor
Archie coin.
God.
Yeah, he's adorable. The audience loves him. So
we have a Freemason who joins us weekly on our show, actually on Wednesday, Ultra and Think Tank. Thomas, who does Paranoid American, who's pretty great. He's a 32nd degree.
32nd degree, damn.
32nd degree, yeah.
I got it.
Where are you? May I ask where you're at?
I am a 4th degree Mark Master Mason in the York Rite, and I am a 3rd degree Master Mason. I'm not in Scottish yet. I keep missing. There's always I never get to go to the 4th degree stuff when it happens. Like I'm always out of town or something's wrong.
Yeah,
and it's driving me insane because I'm like I want to go through it. I want to find out if it is satanic. I don't think it is.
It isn't. My grandfather was a 32nd degree Scottish Rite Freemason, and I'm not a Freemason, but I'm not against Freemasonry. I just think it would make it difficult for me to do my job, because a lot of what I do is try to tell people a lot of things. And if it ever came up that I had an NDA, and I've been in, I mean, I can't say that I have, right? So here's the issue, though. I loved it when I was walking by the Scottish Rite Lodge on 19th Street, and this guy chases me out. And because I'm standing there looking at it for a while, and he just like comes and shakes my hand, and I give him the Masonic handshake because I know the things. But he says to me like, "Are you Mason?" I say, "No, I'm not lying to you or anything." You know, like no, but I give him the shake like I am, like a 3rd degree shake. And I say, "But my grandfather was." So he has me come in, and we look around, and he's like, "Come look at this," and like, this is the fireplace. It belonged to Abraham Lincoln, and it's like big enough for Tartarian giants. Just kidding, but it's huge, you know. And there's this whole area, and then he goes like, "You want to go look in the big room?" So we're like, "Yeah." So he opens the door, and again, I can tell you this because I'm not a Freemason, but he opens the door and it's pitch black, and then he's like, "Oh, it's dark in here." And like, I don't know if you know, but in the ritual, like, you know, oh, it's, you know, it's dark. Show me light. So I'm like, "Oh, do you need a light, brother?" So I turn on my cell phone light, you know, because I was supposed to ask him to turn a light on. But now I'm doing it.
Yeah.
And I don't know, actually, is he messing with me? Like, is he teaching me that, bro, we're all Freemasons? Like, you can't avoid it. Like, you're Neo. Like, what are you going to do? But, like, then the light goes on, and it's just, like, both sides of this giant theater are just painted with these ascended philosophical masters going all the way back to Sumer. And it's incredible, right?
And
I mean,
where was this?
I'm not allowed to tell you. No, I'm just kidding. 19th Street. Scottish Rite Temple,
okay, so it was
San Francisco.
It was a Scottish Rite. Got it. All right.
Yeah.
The Scottish Rite stuff is intriguing to me, but in more of a I want to find out what this is about way than the York Rite stuff, which you got to be a Christian to be a Knight Templar, so I'm that's the track I'm on. But I am interested in the Scottish Rite stuff as well. But Aiden, if you want to take us to another one.
You got it. The next one up is Fandom Maniacs for $2. Says some people think Bigfoot is Cain.
I have heard that one. Have you heard that one?
You mean the Mark of Cain kind of thing? You know, I really think there's the whole Mark of Cain thing. Okay, to an extent, some people think reptilians are descended from Cain, right? There's the idea that the serpent, Lilith, and there's a bunch of different things. I think that we might need to reanalyze other versions. Okay, I'm not sola scriptura. I don't believe that we can look at the King James Bible and say, I don't believe that. I don't believe that everything in it is exactly. I don't think that Adam and Eve are exactly the way that happened. I'm sorry. I don't know. So I kind of think it's more likely that we have a gene convergence of Adamu, which is what that Sumerian word means, right? A herd, right, of a species.
Just to really quickly ask a very important question. When you're citing somebody for Sumerian, are you citing Zechariah Sitchin?
No, and I think you got to be really careful about them. I've had some people on my show that have some pretty good evidence that they're really just closeted Hare Krishnas, that they're really just trying to get people into the Hare Krishna consciousness stuff. And I'm not saying that that's necessarily completely off either, but anybody trying to get you into their religion where they can make you pay tithing, I think is missing like the broader picture of it. And just the idea that humanity probably was convergent, not that it was Adam and Eve. And if you look at like the idea that there was Lilith and Cain, but yeah, I think that really it's like there probably just were a bunch of different kinds of, like Denisovan and Neanderthal we now know did breed together. We have all the genetic evidence of that. So regardless,
we've read with both of them.
Yeah. Look at me, right?
Agamemnon's Gym Bag for $5.60 says, my guy says our current understanding of history isn't 100%, so I'm going to roll with an alternate that's give or take 0%.
Based. I'm going to go with that guy. Like, you drive. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, no, I'm not saying do that either.
Yeah, I definitely did. You didn't come across me as a 0% person at all. And I will tell you this, interacted with a whole bunch of Tartaria people over the last few weeks. And you've definitely been one of the most like polite and open and like, you know, not insisting that you know everything and like just, you know, actually genuinely asking questions rather than the whole I'm just asking questions, but I'm also telling you the truth. Like I ran into a lot of that. So I did want to say I appreciate that this has been a conversation and you just telling me what your thoughts and things are without
that reminds me of this time this guy was like, you know, for an American, you're not quite as stupid as I expected.
When the Brits are always surprised that we know geography.
Yeah,
I know History Daddy's in there somewhere, like, you know.
Yep. Oh, he's the next super chat.
Oh, okay, what does he say?
History Daddy for £2 said, Tartusi got this bro acting up. Had to throw in the accent there.
He's British. Tartusi. The Tartusi has has got you acting up.
I did get somebody like, so I did low value mail with my buddy Danny Polishchuk, and he had a guy on who said some stuff that was like you know, it's all a big psyop, blah, 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 blah. I'm like, well, yeah, it is. But like, you don't get it. Like, it's more than just that. It is a psyop. But like, because the CIA in 1967 you can look it up. Like the CIA used Tartaria as a psyop in 67. They were trying to get the Ukrainians and the Russians to de-Sovietize and renationalize. And they were trying to urge people to be like excited about their Tartar history. Yeah. So yeah, totally. But you can also look at that happening in 19th century Russia. And you can look at pseudo-Turkology, right? So I did an interview with Dugin, Alexander Dugin, the advisor to Putin, right? And he talks a lot about Tartaria from a Turanian perspective, which is that in the 19th century, it was very common to say there's a Turkic, a Persian link, you know, across everything. And I've had linguists that will describe the connections in Japan and Korea to the Turks and to the Persians that were interacting back and forth. So there was, you know, pseudo-Turkology was a movement in the 19th century. And so I think there's also maybe kind of people want to be careful. Like you should be careful before you just jump into. And the worst thing about it is, you know, what do you want? Do you want people to have access to the truth but not care about it? Or the newsy thing where like YouTube has got everyone talking about Tartaria? Like this is kind of valuable because why would you ever have asked me this otherwise? You know, but
yeah, fair. Ben Krasniak for $20 says, "Hey Aiden, 2 questions. 1, did you do the Catmaid stream yet?"
A long time ago.
2, where can I purchase the sexy calendar? Also, I have a few other personal questions about faith I'd like to ask you. Also hope you have a good week.
Best if you want me to absolutely see it, Patreon.
Yeah.
That is where I will definitely see it because I am obligated financially to answer your questions. Which means I actually I actually do set aside time each month to go through the Patreon messages and respond to them.
Yep.
Whereas Instagram, it is. I might see it when you send it. I might see it at 2 a.m. on a Thursday and not answer because I'm tired, and then it's gone forever because the notification isn't there anymore.
Yep.
So I'm not saying pay to send me questions or anything,
but do it. Yeah,
but that will guarantee that I see it. Also, I've if you don't want to subscribe on a monthly basis, but you do have like a question, I have Cameo as well, where same thing. You can send me. It's like $2.50 or something, and I am obligated to answer those within 3 days. So as far as that goes, you can do that. I do try and check my DMs and everything, but the way to guarantee that I will answer a question is if you have paid for it, because I refuse to let people pay for stuff that they're not going to receive.
Yeah.
So
fair. Ryan Whitcup for $6.72. You know what I like. What advice can you give for someone starting content creation? It's about baseball with tips, edits, equipment, etc. You guys do a good job, so I trust you. Heart milk.
I mean, the thing I always tell everybody is start doing it. That's the biggest one. Our first video for a long time was our most viewed video, and I shot it on my iPhone.
Yeah.
And I edited it in iMovie.
And it's not just start, but like clearly, I'm assuming if it's baseball, it's a passion of yours. If you're doing it for genuine reasons, people will recognize that and they will want to watch you, even if they have no interest in baseball, just because they happen to like you as a creator. If you're doing it just because you want to be a content creator, people are going to see right through that. Yeah. It's really almost
except
bizarre.
for Ken Burns. Ken Burns did a baseball documentary that was incredible, on acid or off it. Keep going.
Well, that's what I'm gonna care about.
But yeah, that's my biggest piece of advice for content creation is start. Because a lot of people sit there and they put together a shopping list and they're like, all right, I just need to save up, and then they never save up because nobody ever saves money.
Yeah, you should just wait for tomorrow.
Have you seen the economy right now? You're not going to save that money.
Yeah.
So what I tell people is, you know, if you got an iPhone and you got a YouTube account, you're where you need to be.
Yep.
Be authentic, be yourself, and make sure that if you're talking about something that you might be wrong about, go and check yourself first. Like, just fact check yourself. Because one of the worst things that can happen is when you have a video that, you know, you got something wrong in, and then it gets piled on, and that it's not necessarily bad for you algorithmically, it's bad for you mentally.
Yeah.
And the last thing you want to do is get yourself in a position where you're like, God, I suck at this. Nobody's ever going to watch. This is worthless. This is the pointless off the bat.
Yeah.
Oh my God. New idea for a show. So we get two people with really salient points of view. And then before we let them, like, we just kind of introduce who they are and then just cage match. No conversation. Just throw, like, this guy believes in evolution. This is the creation. Beat him to,
Elon Musk and Mark Zuckerberg.
get rid of
Oh my God.
intellectualisms and all of that sophism and just hit each other.
Yeah, I know you've got a PhD, but let's see how you handle a blunderbuss.
Yeah, see, PhD to the face, bud. All right.
Agamemnon's gym bag for $5 says, and I believe this is for you, Andreas. What parts of Fomenko's arguments do you disagree with him on?
Oh, I mean, well, I think maybe it's important to understand that Fomenko first had some presuppositions. He's like, if this were true, then that would mean this were true. So that would mean that the Jewish people must be from Moscow. So I kind of, you know what I mean? Like things like that. I'm not like, I don't really think that Jewish people are from Moscow. I know that there were some Jewish people that went through Moscow.
Yeah.
There's some Jewish people that went through Peking, right? Like it's not even that Chinese food at Christmas time was invented by, the 20th century. That exists in the 9th or 8th century in the Peking Jews. So everything is way more interesting than the official story anyway. But yeah, I mean, there's some things he said that do lead, like, okay, there really are some interesting stories about it's kind of like Mormonism. I think we brought it back to that, but like Christians in England thinking, okay, well, we must be from the biblical time of Jesus. And so the connection there that the Irish had to be of like, Gentile or non-Gentile descent or ancestry. Like that's the kind of thing where I think maybe there could be some connection here because there's no reason why boats couldn't have made it. And we do see, but genetically, you don't necessarily see that link yet, unless you're going to look for like pre-exomic DNA. If you're saying Homo capensis is a thing, which is a whole other kind of Bigfoot with red hair, it's going to be really difficult to prove all of that. And if you do, what you're going to find is more interesting, that it's not about what race you've been for the last few thousand years. It's like, that's so new. Like there's really Bigfoot stuff is going to be the last 200,000 years. And so that's going to probably be more interesting than these little tiny things that happened recently. But yeah, I don't know. Like Fomenko does say, he did say some things as he was putting together his argument, which I don't think he necessarily is fully saying like, oh yeah, kill me if I'm wrong. Like Moscow is Israel. But I do think perhaps I'm pretty open to the idea that Jesus might have actually been crucified in Istanbul instead of in Israel. Like I think that's possible, and I do believe that I'm open-minded to some things that I would have looked at just the way you did originally. I've been like, no way, that's ridiculous. I don't do that to some of the things you said anymore, particularly that one. I know we're gonna have to come back and do this again. You're like, come on,
now I'm
you cannot just leave me on that. Yeah.
All right, moving along, because I'm gonna sit here for like 20 minutes and be like, how the hell?
we're gonna talk later. I'm gonna get you like a little pamphlet like on Joseph Smith and the Tartarians. I'm just kidding, but there's some things that'll talk a bit about Istanbul, and like I think that might send you off some places. And I'd love to hear your rebuttals for sure.
Yeah, sure. I mean,
excellent.
Yeah, I'm all for it.
Ben Krajniak for $5 gives another question for Andreas. If I understand you, Jesuits are like Jedi. If so, who are the Sith in this timeline?
Dude, the Scythians. The Scythians are there. Come on. Yeah, the Scythians.
Yeah, all right. Okay, fair. Also,
he gives me that one.
I appreciate. I got yelled at on Twitch the other day by my viewers for saying Scythia. Because
like,
that's how it's pronounced.
You're such a Scythy.
That is how it's pronounced.
Yeah.
The Greeks didn't have the letter C. Okay.
Phantom Maniacs for $5 has a little confusion about the Akhenaten thing, saying Akhenaten was King Tut's father, so he's saying that Moses was King Tut's father? The timing doesn't make sense. How would it work?
Yeah, so the idea also with King Tut, I mean, do you believe in the hermaphrodite King Tut thing? How do you feel about the idea that the royals...
that was a thing.
I don't know if you really want to go deep into this.
It wouldn't surprise me considering
the idea that there's a bunch of hermaphroditic royals, and I don't know. I don't even know if I really want to get into that one.
That one, honestly, just knowing the practice of incest within the Egyptian royal families, that doesn't surprise me.
And the British royal family, this is not just like an ancient thing. This might be a contemporaneous thing.
Well, if it's showing up that there's a lot of hermaphroditism in royal families, I feel like there's a very obvious explanation.
Yeah.
It's like
Stop.
I don't think
Stop
there's
is
a
the
special
answer.
royal power to change your sex at will, but
But it could also be that there's you know, because if it does come up a lot and then you inbreed, so you continue that, then that makes that more prevalent of a trait. That becomes a gene trait that exists in that family. So I don't know. I don't really want to get into that. I think this is a really uncomfortable subject for a lot of reasons.
It's fine,
Yeah.
but that's just yeah. All right, moving along.
Will S for $10 says, so I was rewatching the Roanoke video and noticed the bit about John White might be a Templar.
Wait. But I feel like we didn't actually answer the question. Now that I'm thinking about it.
Fair enough. Well, so the idea that the royal family was replaced.
Oh, okay. Got it.
Right. And so, because Moses being not actually of that royal line, and so he was actually raised there, he's replaced. And then, so outside of his line is the regular royal family, which is, which I
think I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
So Will S's thing about the Roanoke video, noticing that the bit that says John White might be a Templar, asking what's the deal with that? Sounds really interesting. Plus, I'm related to him, so that's extra interesting.
So my intention was not to say that John White was a Templar or that there was evidence he was. I was just pointing out that it was a little interesting that they used the same cross as the Templars did as the one that was supposed to be a symbol that something had gone wrong or that something had gone right. So if I remember correctly, if there was a cross, that meant that they had left under duress. And if there was not a cross, then that meant that they had left willingly and they were fine, most likely. But
like a paperclip thing. I like it.
Yeah, that was their, how do we let you know what's going on here? But the cross they used was the same cross that the Templars used. And there were specific crosses that each military order had. So in this case, it was specifically the Templar one. But the thing is, that cross has been used by other groups throughout history.
Right.
Just for me, knowing that there are these legends about Templars escaping from France and then hopping on a boat and going across the Atlantic, you look at those kinds of things, and it's like, I do wonder if maybe there was something going on.
I love those. I love those. I think I'm very open to those. I know that let's put it this way. The words Tartaria and Tartarian and Tartar were not alien to those people. So and then if you think about Sir Francis Bacon and Nova Atlantis, I don't know if you've read that, but the idea of the discovery
of
Christian,
it, I just haven't read it.
Check it out, Christian utopia. Like the Bible washes up on the shores of America, and then they've become a perfect Christian nation by accident.
There are some very interesting Native American traditions that do, at least in the way they're described in the books from the time period by the people who went and did the ethnography, that do sound strikingly similar to Judaism.
Yeah, and the Croatoans have Welsh vernacular, and there's also
I know what you're talking about there, but it's not the Croatan. It's there's a group. I think it's a Seminole group, if I remember correctly. Are you talking about the Welsh prince who supposedly made it to the Gulf of Mexico?
Oh, there's that too, but there's just the Croatan language has some Welsh in it supposedly, or somebody. I don't know if I can find the proof of it right here, but might not be able to find it.
That's fine. Well. I can always look at it. That's an interesting enough short.
Yeah.
If nothing else.
I mean, there's been a long
this episode has given me a lot of shorts opportunities because I'm like, ooh, I can do a little.
There's a lot of
fact checks.
There you go.
There was some Welsh. There's some Welsh activity on the coast of South America and Argentina as well.
Yeah, there's a Welsh colony down there.
Right. And I think the Welsh are a very important part of this story when you start to look at like the trade, the travel, how Christianity evolved, the philosophies of Welsh slaves and monks, that you'll see that the Welsh mythology did survive. But it's one of those things where, like you said, like the Druids and things, so much of it was culturally dismantled and erased that it's going to be really, really difficult for us to know like what did the Druids or what did the Welsh really practice or think.
Archaeology is very important for this period of history for us to understand anything.
And that's the only way I want to approach this. I hope I've made that clear. Like, I'm not trying to
you've definitely come across as more of a like, show me the evidence and I'll believe it kind of guy, which I appreciate.
But I mean, it's fascinating to look at the Welsh and the Gaelic, the Gauls. You can look at Asterix and Obelix, and it's kind of real. There really is a connection to all these people that were interacting with each other that we used to think just they must have been on the other side of a wall from each other. I think that's the most interesting part of the Tartaria ideology or philosophy or perspective. Is just we did interact, we did know each other, and things did happen more.
Right. All right. Well, yeah, I have some thoughts on that I want to talk to you about privately.
Cool.
But yeah.
Michael V for $10 wants an explanation about the several decades that Greece was under the Byzantine Empire and why there exist Greek texts during that time. Love the channel. Have a good day.
Yep. I guess so. I mean, several decades. I would push it further, several centuries. But yeah, I guess so. The question is, why do we?
Why did Greek people write in Greek?
Well, basically, like if that was under the control of the Ottomans, then why
do people write in
Greek
Chinese in Daly City in San Francisco? Like, why do I have Koreatown? I don't know.
So you'd be arguing that it was a multicultural civilization.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
This is the thing that's really confusing to us. We're like, well, they clearly would have been like the Europeans and burned everybody, right? I don't know why that's such a presumption.
All right, I see what you're saying.
Fair. Quattro, who's been a member for 10 months.
Damn, Quattro, you've been here a while.
Yeah, seriously. It's all Mothman. He's the overlord. This is
yes. Tim Pool is Mothman.
Tim Pool is Mothman? Okay.
Yeah.
You know, I thought I saw some wings when I was down there.
Yeah, could be the thing. Yeah.
There was some screeching outside my window one night.
No comment. NDA.
Cakes for $4.99 said, I would like all three of you gentlemen to describe the way to make grilled cheese. I know everyone has their unique way.
Okay.
Really? I'm going last.
I butter my bread before I put the cheese on it.
And you just fry it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. I use a toaster oven usually because I'm kind of like lazy. I would put probably, if I were going to go hard, there'd be bacon fat and in a skillet.
For me, I feel
I guess, describe your ideal grilled cheese, I think is the way to do this. Like, how do you do your ideal grilled cheese?
I don't know. You guys go first now.
Okay.
I guess I'll go first. So you start off, you warm the bread a bit in a pan, and then you spread the butter so that way it's a little bit more liquidy. Then you sear it, and then you take one piece of the bread, put the cheese on it, put it in toaster on broil, so that way it warms the cheese and melts the cheese without over toasting the bread. And then you put the bread back together for a quick warm on the pan, or you put it back in the toaster for even warmth, and then you eat it.
You're a sociopath. That was way too many steps.
As he was saying it, didn't he look like Frasier's brother? He's like, well, like as you got really methodical. No, I agree. The problem is if I put that much work into it, I'd probably put meat in my sandwich.
Yeah,
Exactly.
That's fair.
I'm going cast iron skillet warmed up, some clarified butter in it, some regular butter on the grilled cheese.
The only downside is if you
and
only
then Colby
do the
Jack and
skillet,
American.
Oh yeah, we didn't talk about what kind of cheese you're gonna use. Are you gonna put?
true.
Okay, I would take brie and I would put it at 111 degrees for about 48 minutes first, so that it hits a good opening temperature.
48 minutes.
Yeah, you want the brie to be kind of loose. You want it to open. Yeah, and then you put the brie on slices on top of the butter, and then I'd put the bread into the oven so it would start to melt on into the bread. And then I would do a final flash sear in about 2 tablespoons of bacon fat for sure.
Fair enough.
I would assume that answers the question.
Yeah, I think it's sufficient.
Also, tomato.
Give me a glass of Chardonnay.
Tomato soup is a must-have for grilled cheese.
Oh yes.
I took the Chardonnay, but the tomato soup makes sense.
Yeah.
Potato Man for $4.99 said, I'm a big fan from Alaska, but this is my first time getting to watch live.
I love Alaska. Oh my God, Alaska's the best for this.
You guys should totally come here sometime, maybe even visit Portland.
I would love to.
Same.
I was just in Alaska for solstice last year, and just it's incredible. Alaska, first off, you feel like this is a lie. Like we're clearly in Russia. It's like stop pretending. Like we know where we are. I get it with the jeeps and the military base, but there's a lot of Russian names for everything, and you find about the Russian American trade. Like we had the Virginia company. There's a Russian America company. Yeah, and all along the coast, these Russian into Santa Cruz. Santa Cruz, California was conquered by the Russians, and Nova Angelisk, they had a plan. So it's really weird when you think about the history of California. Like this could have been Japan, it could have been Ireland, it could have been Mexico, it could have been Russia, it could have been a lot of people's.
Yeah, we in our video on Portlock, Alaska, the town that just kind of mysteriously was abandoned basically overnight in the 1940s. We looked into that, and just the extent of Russian exploration of the American West Coast is something you just don't learn about.
Yeah. I mean, there's also that weird Alaska nuclear tower, you know what I'm talking about? Like you have to drive through a mountain to get to it. It's crazy. I love Alaska.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, we have a question in here that regards you not being with Timcast anymore. Is that something you're?
I probably don't really need to.
Okay,
I mean,
yeah.
I love Tim. I love them. I love.
Mhm.
I kind of, this is. I want to do my
Yeah.
videos, and I
Yeah,
do my videos
that's
all the
why
time.
I asked if it was
Yeah.
something you wanted to answer. I didn't want to.
But I do love Tim, and
Yeah.
I love Timcast. They're great, and I
Yeah.
love Brett. I'm stoked on him and everybody there.
He and I
awesome.
had so much fun.
Yeah.
Brett was such a fun guy. I had such a good time. He was such a good host. I cannot say enough good things about like everybody I met down there was so nice to me and so accommodating. They really made me just feel like I was part of the group immediately. It was very cool.
Nice. Hermes for $5.56 says, first actual live stream. Glad I could finally catch one. Thoughts on the concept of snake milk?
Why?
You know who follows us.
I'm not surprised the question was asked. I just like snake milk.
Of
Do
all the
snakes
milks.
produce milk?
I'm
sure they do, right?
Well, they're not
That makes sense.
mammals.
But that doesn't mean they can't make milk.
I thought only mammals produced milk.
Oh, there's a milk snake,
Good question.
not snake milk.
No,
Well, maybe not.
It's snake milk.
Yeah,
At least
that's
that's the
snake
question it's
milk.
referring to. Whoa.
Whoa.
I don't know. Is snake milk just venom? Like,
I think so.
probably, yeah.
Like,
okay.
I think they do call like, isn't extracting the venom from a snake called milking?
Correct.
I hate that.
Yep.
That's the worst.
Yep. Wendigo's Breakfast, for what might be one of the best usernames that we've come across, for $5.37 says, first time catching the show live. I've been able to catch up on the podcasts over the last month. Love the show.
Oh, well, thank you.
Also, thank you for your first super chat. Heather is
they
asking
want
for an
Archie
aloo.
to do the howl.
Yes.
Archie, come here, bud.
Somebody asked for. Oh yeah, Pumpkin Bear. I guess I missed this. Pumpkin Bear earlier said,
Oh.
"Can I get an Archie a woo for my birthday?
Where did
Happy
he go?
birthday for
Archie,
what?
come here, bud. He's right here. Come here. You ready? You ready for your moment? Come on. Come on. Come on.
There he is.
All right. This is a cool little trick he does. Ow, ow, ow. Ow, ow. You can't. It's filtering it out because it's a dog sound. But ow, ow, ow. It's just so cute.
Oh my gosh.
Like just the head goes back. He's so excited. He's like. I love him so much.
He's great. Sarian Berghausen for €5.99. So Tartaria was a confederacy of Finno-Ugric, Turkic, and Mongolic peeps. Lots of old words in common between Finnish, Turkish, and Mongol, for example.
That is actually the mainstream opinion. Is that
Yeah.
when Tartary
It's
is being
not.
referenced back then, that is quite literally what they're talking about, is just those groups, and they didn't
Right.
quite understand what the political situation was.
Yeah,
So they
because
just
they're not
referred to
all
them
the
as
same.
Tartars.
So this is really interesting. So when I was in anthropology in school, and the fundamental belief was that civilization arises out of war, right? So these groups will defend themselves, but there was starting to emerge some places in South America that didn't match up with that theory. It looked like perhaps these were places where trade had come together and that civilization had come out of trade. And this was completely against the nature of Eurocentric history. But we've proven now there are parts of history where trade was more important than war. And it seems to be scarcity comes after some sort of a disaster. So war-based civilization is almost always a reset situation, like the Edo period or Eurocentric. Sorry to, rant, but the idea that it was a trade empire instead of a race or a nation, it opens it up because a nation state, a racial nation state, it's so small. Look what the Edo period did to Japan versus like these Turanian and Persian empires where they're bringing in conscripted soldiers. There's a confluence of different kinds of people all the time, and so it's mimetic, right? Like they're trading ideas, and so those ideas spread, and it could probably be very confusing to one group or another group. That there's this, Islam is confusing for that matter because you've got different kinds of people that believe it, right?
Yeah, yeah. We should have a conversation about an idea that's percolating right now.
0 Hour for $2 says, "Knowledge is power." Francis Bacon.
Yes, agreed.
It's a reference.
And be really careful with Baconian or Aristotelian logic,
All Dragons Are Sluts for $10 says, random thought.
I
Golem
always forget that username exists.
Right. Random thought. Golem is a Wendigo. Killed someone over a ring and ate intelligent creatures on the Goblin Caves. Greed and cannibalism.
Yeah.
Well, I think that on the wave of J.R. Tolkien being like one of the greatest African writers of all time, but he got Beowulf from look at you right now. I know.
It took me a second because I was like, wait a second, what? I was like, right, he's from South Africa.
Yeah, but he did study the Cotton Codex, like we brought up earlier. And so he was familiar with Beowulf from, the get-go, as well as with Tartaria. And the Golem, I mean, his understanding of religion is just beyond Tertullian. He's not looking at this kind of you will be a servant of God. It's that Christ came to make you more godlike, to be a co-heir. And so there, I don't know, different line of thought, but the philosophy of J.R.R. Tolkien really is to show the recent history of the world the way it was lost, I think, from his own perspective.
Yeah.
Cakes for $4.99 says, the deep lore grilled cheese is exactly what I was looking for, boys. Absolutely love hearing how other people cook. Please make a cooking lodge page.
That is actually something we've discussed, is putting together like a Lore Lodge cookbook, because I do cook a lot.
And he's very good at it.
So, yeah.
My grandfather was a chef in World War II as well. I think that's the job, right? That's what you want to do.
Yeah, it seems like in war, especially, being a cook.
Yeah.
Unless you poison everybody, in which case they're probably not going to be happy with you.
Not a good plan for anybody involved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Agamemnon's Gym Bag for $5 says, no butter, spicy mayo on the outside of the bread. Throw it on a hot pan with pepper jack, roast beef, and a pickle until golden brown. You're welcome.
Are you from somewhere in like the Southwest? Because that felt like a very Southwestern take on a grilled cheese.
Yeah, it does a bit.
Even the diction, the
don't
way
get me
it came
wrong.
out, the cadence,
Don't get me wrong, it sounds delicious. Like, that sounds fantastic.
Is the roast beef on the outside of the grilled cheese sandwich?
I don't think it was supposed to be.
Not on the outside, no.
But
spicy
if you did it that way, I'd be for it, because then it would still be a grilled cheese, in my opinion.
Yeah, true.
Yeah.
I made some pierogies. I don't know if you're here for this one.
No.
But I did some pierogies where I took mac and cheese and used that as a bed, fried up some pierogies with the seasoning I use when I cook meat. So pierogies with butter and olive oil and sour cream, and then I topped that off with, I just really quickly seared some prosciutto in the in like the leftover butter and everything, and put that on top. Oh my god.
What was it you did with the pierogies? You mixed it. I can't remember if it was like ice cream or something.
See, and these are Tartarian foods. Pierogies are Tartarian. I'm just kidding. No, but really they are, if you think about it, right? Pierogies everywhere in the world. One of the leftover remnant ideas.
Every culture has a dumpling.
What did you mix with pierogies back when you were over there? When we went out the one night and we came
like
home?
the dragon.
It might have been the prosciutto one. Was it not the prosciutto one?
No, it was something like
Smoked
out
salmon?
of left field. No, I could have sworn it was like ice cream.
It wasn't ice cream, but I do know what you're talking about, and I just can't remember
Yogurt?
what it was.
Because it was so good.
I'll have to
Yogurt's
think about
good
it.
with that because it's like sour cream.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, that makes
It
sense.
wasn't that. God, what was it? I know what you're talking about, and it'll probably come to me at like 1 a.m.
Fair. If it comes to you 1 a.m., just text me.
I will.
Dude, but you know what every Tartarian loves is fish with tartar sauce. That's the answer.
So does every British man.
I did find that apparently the tartan, the clothing item worn by the Scots, apparently does derive, at the very least, etymologically derives from Tartary.
Really?
Yep.
Yeah, it does. But the tartan itself comes from Botswana and so does the bagpipes, because Roman centurion soldiers who brought the bagpipes from the conscripted Egyptian or African soldiers. So they're goat skin bagpipes. And if you look at Botswana tartans and plaids, they still make plaids that look very similar in that style. Yeah.
Austin Witt Sticks for $10 says, I have nothing to say. I just love the content. Plus, finally caught a stream. Welcome.
Sweet. I appreciate that as a guest. Thank you very much as well.
Pumpkin Bear 7 for $2 says, favorite type of milk, Uncle man?
Goat milk.
Y'all are gonna clown me so hard.
Hemp milk?
I love strawberry milk.
Oh,
not chalky?
I prefer strawberry.
See, like, I'm just scared of it because I'm from California and they showed me those weird dairy vegan documentaries. Yeah, they were like, yeah, and you know what they do to those milks? Those udders are in the milk. That's why it's red, man. It's the blood from the cow. Yeah, dude.
Oh
Like
my God.
the way they talk about it is like worse than anti-Semitism,
I
the
don't think that's
anti-dairy
true.
mafia.
I don't
No,
think that they do.
but it's scary, isn't it? Scary if you heard that at 8 years old. You'd
Also,
never
I
drink
feel like
strawberry
saying it's
milk.
worse than anti-Semitism might be taking it a bit
I says on the same wave because it's a bunch of nonsense.
I will say PETA are nuts. Like
Yeah.
They're basically anti-Semites. They need to be stopped.
But I mean, we were talking about it on Pop Culture Crisis actually. Like PETA kills just so many animals.
You know what they
every
do though?
year.
That's awesome. Here's what's cool about PETA, besides the fact that they murder all these cute animals, is that what they'll do is that they'll get your money and put it into making the lab-grown meat. Because the idea is that if you can't hurt an animal, then there's no reason not to eat meat.
Mhm.
So they're all about that. But take it further. Why can't you eat human? So when you get to the point of growing lab-grown human, guess who's paying for that? Yeah,
PETA?
PETA's involved. Yeah, PETA's
God.
involved with tea tree cannibalism. That's the future right there, because no one gets
There
hurt.
was a jump there that I didn't quite make.
Yeah, be afraid of PETA. All right,
I think he's saying PETA might start selling human meat one day. But
very
like,
soon.
lab-grown human meat.
Yes.
Yep.
That was it.
Oh, I see the jump now. Got
Yeah.
it.
And they're
If
heavily
it's lab-grown human
Yeah.
mate, then why not?
Also,
Yeah,
there's
okay,
been
got it.
multiple instances where people have had their dogs abducted from the front yard
Yeah.
by PETA. They
Oh,
had to
man,
settle
don't
for.
get
They had to
me-
pay a family like $48,000 because they abducted a girl's chihuahua.
Don't get me into this one, but like pagan witchcraft stuff. There was the Trump curse, and I remember
I
when
remember that.
Yeah, so there was a bunch of dogs that were kidnapped or they were stolen from a
Mhm.
bunch of people's houses, and they were sacrificed. There was a serious
Jeez.
ritual, like serious
that-
with the SIRIUS
Was that
by
in,
these
like in
pagans.
the news?
No, of course not, because instead what was in the news was the actual invocation ritual. They were telling people how to curse Trump in the news, not what was going on.
I'm gonna need you to send me that link because that sounds.
we'll have to get back on
nuts.
that. It's some crazy. There's some crazy stuff that was going on those years.
Yeah, I mean that entire 4-year period.
Yeah, but at the
was
very
so
beginning, oh my
strange.
word, it
So
got dark.
strange. But
Yep. Your least favorite YouTube channel for $2 says Bible Sons of Enoch.
I think he's talking about the giants that
Enoch.
are.
Hmm.
No,
Yeah.
Enoch, not Enoch.
Oh,
different. Yeah,
Really?
Enoch talks about the Nephilim. Sons of Enoch is probably referring to the Rephaim, who are believed to have been a exceptionally tall race of people.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
Like the skinny, long-looking ones from the
the
museum.
the Bible basically gives the dimensions for their beds as being, I think, 9 feet long and 13 feet wide.
Well, I
Oh,
don't
it's
usually.
finishing
Okay,
big and tall.
I mean, we have giants in that realm of people that were 8 feet tall
Yeah.
from the Potsdam Giants, and there are people that could be even taller than that. There's stories of people meeting people, in Florida, and they're like 10 feet tall or whatever. It's possible that there were some really tall people, but there really are mammals with fingers and toes in their skeletons that are 100 feet tall. They're called whales. The idea that there are giant mammals that exist. I mean, this story could be, again, there could be a layer of truth here that we should be looking for. And the idea that dolphins might have been land creatures before the Cretaceous period at some point, that they were maybe a little bit of both and that they devolved. That's why their fingers and toes are still in their bodies.
Mhm.
I think we can look at microevolution and say it's possible that there might have been giant mammals by looking at the size of a whale. So I'm pretty open-minded. I think I'm about as open-minded as you are, though. I'm pretty skeptical still.
Yeah. Yeah. The Giants thing, we've been meaning to do a video on that, and I think I've been trying to make it a collaborative thing with a couple of other people who agreed they wanted to do it, but getting the schedules of 3 content creators with over 200,000 subs each, and one of them has a lot more than 200,000 subs. So like,
Yeah.
in fact, we're the smallest of the people in this group. So like, getting those schedules to line up, it might have to be the thing where I'm like, listen, I need you to send me your portions of the video by like December.
Yeah.
Well, it's hard because like those kinds of conversations, like what you need is you need to bring up all the evidence, and it's really
Yeah.
hard because with giants, the Smithsonian got rid of a lot of giants, and their story is that
I keep hearing that. I keep
no,
hearing that.
they
And I've
opened-
never seen evidence.
There is, but it's not like, because again, you're gonna hear, oh, they had 100-foot tall people and then they just burned them. No, that's not what happened. Like there are museums that were built that were showing native bones, and they said you cannot just display the remains of these tribes. Like, this is disrespectful. You have to return the bones to the tribes.
Okay.
And that happened in California and Pasadena.
Did they return the bones to the tribes?
They did.
So the tribes should still have the bones.
Right, but they don't have to give them to people, right? And so
but...
they buried them. Like,
they reburied them. Okay.
Yeah. And so, I mean, there's a similar situation with the California coast. The Pasadena Museum had giants. If you look up let me see if I can find
I am curious, when you say giants, and Archie, you are right under my feet, dude.
He's been there
9 feet, 7 to 9 feet.
Because there were in the and this is why I push back on the this was like a cover-up kind of thing, is because if that's talking about the same giants that were in it's the Bureau of American Ethnology's 12th annual report. It's from like 1898. But in that, they actually very explicitly do mention that they found these burial mounds, and that like 20 feet down, you had exceptionally tall people. And
they're saying like 12 feet.
The Bureau of Ethnology report says it's like 7. 7 to 7.5, I think. So it's much
7
more
to
reasonable.
9 is more reasonable, right?
And then what it says is that they were surrounded by normal-sized human skeletons, like 5'8" to 5'10", which suggested that these were exceptionally important people, and that likely their height was seen as a status symbol. And there's, of course, questions, were these other bodies people that were supposed to be like protecting that person in the afterlife? Were they there to keep the giant from coming back and terrorizing people? How does this factor into the Wendigo legend as being is there any connection there?
Yep.
Because of course Wendigos are described as giants in some cases. So yeah, there's some really interesting stuff in ethnology reports from like 1870 to 1920 between America and Canada, that basically they really do just write down everything they found. And
and there's not a lot of
it's not riddled with analysis. It's like, here's what we found, here's the analysis. It's not, here's how we analyzed what we found, which is nice.
But that's also why so much of history needs to be called into question, because you have like, okay, well, we have this evidence of this newspaper article. I was like, okay, like the Mississippi River ran backwards according to the newspaper, like in 1811. Let's look into that a little bit. I mean,
there's some very interesting stuff in the newspapers too.
Yeah.
And when you hear, like, you'll get kind of like whisper down the lane if you go back to the early enough ones pre-Telegraph.
For sure. Well, that's like, so since I worked at CNN, when I first started hearing about Tartaria, I was like, oh, the idea that everything in fake news might be fake news, it was fake news that day, but now it's fake history. Oh man, you have to look at every newspaper the same way we write them today, because there's not much that's changed. They're trying to sell you a story and hide the truth. Every single paper. It's crazy.
Yeah, there's God. I will never trust the media. I don't care if it's right wing, left wing. I don't care.
Well, the media. I'm gonna do it, Alex Jones.
Yeah, exactly.
The media is really the Medea. Medea is this witch that has to make the sigil for all the nights.
Literally, me trying to do our Bohemian Grove video, getting through Alex Jones just saying things that were like 10% right, and then having to explain like, okay, that's not Moloch, it's actually Apollo, but here's why it's Apollo.
Yeah, I'm glad that you know that. That's really interesting. Well, that's an important thing. And also, if you invert so they do this thing where they show the owl around the Congress building. If you invert it upside down, you'll see the Apollo also with like the legs of the head. And if you start to look into the Order of the Pug, because we talked a bit about Catholicism and Masonry, the Order of the Pug is the Irish Catholic Masonry group, which the original starters of Bohemian Grove were members of the Order of the Pug. It's a weird one. You have to like kiss the butt of the statue of a pug dog to join. It's kind of adorable.
Interesting.
But Bohemian Grove is not far from here. Like I'm not far from there. There's a lot of people that are members of Bohemian Grove, and my great grandfather was a member. I have like some books from Bohemian Grove, and they do plays every year. And it's not. I mean, I think it's important to understand. Like the idea, like for instance, there's more slaves today than in any time in history, right? People it's beyond the veil, and that's all it is. So it can't exist. People aren't used to it.
What I found particularly odd about Bohemian Grove was not, there was a lot of weirdness. What I was really uncomfortable with was like the number of actual policy decisions that seemed to be made there. Like, that bugged me.
Well, what the heck do you think that? I mean, I don't know. I find that to be the weirdest one, that people like politics are the flatulence of relationships, right? Relationships define everything. And to be a conspiracy theorist is almost to miss out on the truth, which is that the world is a relationship. It's relationship theorists that you need to be. You have to figure out the relationships between people, between places and things, like the proximity, the coordination, the benefit is exchanged. I mean, that's what makes the Bilderberg hotel, the name, so important. It was a hotel. It's not like they meet at the Bilderberg Hotel in Switzerland every year, but it shows how this works. People that are in power and policy will get together, and then they'll decide things beyond democracy. The mechanisms of democratic process are really just to create a mob rule to remove all rights, because all rights are up to discussion.
I'm curious what your take on this would be, but the idea that the powers that be, whether that be the United States government, the UN, you know,
Lucifer,
nonprofits, whatever, the idea that when a conspiracy theory pops up that is too close to the truth, they deliberately sabotage it with something more ridiculous.
Well, that happens anyway, naturally. It's a telephone game. Like, so, you know, first, I mean, again, with the Lizzo is famous for being fat, even though she's an amazing flautist.
She is very good at the flute.
Yeah, but people don't care about the truth. They care about sensationalism and emotional reaction and guttural response. And, you know, this is why we don't have debates anymore, because they're not necessary for emotional guttural responses. They might accidentally lead to people hearing all sides of an argument, right? So we're moving away from logic and reason, and that's so great for democratic process, because democratic process is based on misinformation or information, and then irrational emotional decisions being made. And it's always a curiarchy, which is like everybody is dividing themselves. Like, we might be different because there's women out there, so we're the men, but we're different because, you know, I'm a Slavic man, so I'm not part of your group, but you guys are different because, you know, he's taller, I don't know, or whatever it is. So you start to have micro oppression, and it's designed that it continually it bids each section against itself to remove rights in Fabian steps, because you constantly are taking away from the other group, and you're constantly a minority because you're always able to divide yourself down into lesser and lesser. And so, yeah, but also just with the truth itself, of course, you know, beyond the organic process, yes, Mockingbird exists. Yes, look into the church committee hearings. Yes, look into how media is manipulated. If you haven't done that, you know, do it. Look into, you know, yeah.
But
what do you want?
It is 10 o'clock, so let's get through these last super chats that are in here so we can
just that we have another like 10.
Oh boy.
Yeah, so
all right, let's just go through them quick, and we'll address everything short.
Okay.
The short way. The short way.
Okay. Mental Hedgehogs for 555 says, Andreas, do you think Bigfoot and Mothman know about Tartaria? And if so, why are they complicit? Also love seeing the triple A's, Aiden, Archie.
Of course.
Yeah, I mean, so Mothman, I think that I don't know if it could just be military stuff. Like, I think that there's a lot more weird stuff that goes on that we don't, like, and then it's easier to call it aliens, because then you're like, oh, that guy's crazy. So you don't have to look into it's actually some sort of a thing that the military was doing or something like that, experimenting with a new super soldier suit or something, who knows, or whatever it could be. With Bigfoot. So yeah, I just think that that's a hard, whether or not there still are bipedal hominids that are so different than us
that we wouldn't recognize them.
That's a great question. I think it's probably like not too likely, but if it is, it's possible still, because there's plenty of state parks, national parks. That's the argument that's always made. There's places that the government has kept us away from that there could, since the 19th century. Why did they build these state parks? Did Teddy Roosevelt really care about nature? Was he really like a loving What if it was, I like my favorites, the fairy treaties. The fairies started a war with Teddy Roosevelt, and they said they're going to blow up the earth if we don't respect the fairies.
You just mentioned the very first conspiracy we ever talked about.
Yeah. It's literally the whole reason this started.
Because the first thing was we literally had a video where we were like, is the National Park Service hiding the Wendigo?
Yeah.
Like,
Right.
so
Well, I
that
mean,
was
it's a
our,
weird.
yeah.
There's probably a lot of secret bases there. You know, if someone sees something, they might get disappeared. I mean, it'd be a great place to hide a secret base, especially during World War II and in the 50s. I mean, there's all these other times that we have to think about people making decisions. That it's not. We have to be very careful about presentism and contemporaneous logic. So I think it's possible that there could still be. And then also looking at the wild man or the hairy Mary. Do you ever see the picture? If you look up hairy Mary, they used to think Jesus was covered in fur like Chewbacca, and there's pictures of Mary being covered in fur like Chewbacca. Tons of these medieval paintings of hairy Mary. And if you go to Hearst Castle, you'll see the wild men on the cover covered in fur. So into the 16th century, you've got depictions of this. And again, I think dragons are probably giant birds. So I think there's some truth there still.
Yeah, I can see, I can agree with where you're coming from. I might have some disagreements on exact things, but I can agree with the sentiment. I do want to really something that's in the chat. I think our Logan, they're talking about when we had Professor Benjamin Olshan on, not the time that we had Milo on to talk about Ancient Apocalypse, because we did have we had a professor come on, and that was kind of to talk about it from more the academic angle. Milo was a little bit more like the content creator and archaeologist angle. So we try and, if possible, I love to be able to have, like, you know, multiple people talk about something, because I think that's the best way we can get the most information out there, and you can see all the arguments from every different side, which is, you know, obviously why we have Andreas on right now, is because he's on another side, and we wanted to hear his opinion.
Flat Earth, the whales are giants. I'm sorry.
Hermes for $5 says, snakes do milk, don't at me. Also, have you ever looked into Operation Dark Winter? If so, any thoughts?
I have not, but I guess that's going into the content sheet.
Yep.
Yeah, that's cool.
And okay, snake milk.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I mean, if you look up the 2001 debt jubilee and tie that to Dark Winter, you might find something interesting.
All right. Big
D for 1999 says, just wanted to say hi to y'all since I finally caught a stream. Howdy.
Thank you. Hi.
Aloha.
Crusader Legosi for $10 says, Ito question, what do you mean by reset? I thought this was the unification of clans under Tokugawa Ieyasu to create peace. New art, sure, but not really a reset. Closed trade except for the Dutch too.
Yeah, I didn't say anything about that because I don't know nearly enough about Japanese history. So
I think the resets are kind of interesting because we look at these environmental resets. We think of 5 major extinctions and the 6th extinction that's coming. I think that there's probably been a few cultural resets, and we already know that in the 20th century and the Dark Ages, we psychologically think about there being a reset from the Roman Empire to the Dark Ages. So it's not out of the realm of our thinking that there's been resets where we've been at a height, lost some, and then continued on again. I don't think that's that unusual of a thought.
Gotcha.
Agamemnon's Gym Bag for 209 says, the giants returned to the sea.
Obviously.
Based, bro. Yeah.
Just to really quickly just comment on that, I do think that's
no one's going to argue with that.
Yeah, not the giants returning to the sea part, but the one before that. I think part of the issue that I'm catching on to with Tartaria, as I spend a little bit more time in the subreddit and trying to understand this way of thinking, and this theory, it seems like a big problem that the community has is terminology and using just the wrong words for things.
Correct.
Which
I think that it's kind of the same problem with anything, the 1619 project or anything else. It's so much fun to think you can understand something now without having to do the work. You're like, oh, cool. Now because all history is a lie, throw that away.
Yep.
I can just continue on from here. That's not my goal. My goal is to figure out what really happened. And it's usually his side, her side, the truth. You know, you can get, you can't just, and that's why it's interesting also to look at really like Turkish nationalists, like, oh, everything comes from Turkey sides of things, because that's like the third. There's the ancient aliens thing. There's the we're all Turkish thing. And then there's the we recently just got it together because of Atlanticism thing. And none of those are right. There's no way, you know, and that's kind of why.
Guys, Mummy Kirishima for $9.99 says, guys, if you're ever in the SoCal area, go to the Black Cow Cafe. It's so good. Everything there is good, and their Chipotle grilled cheese. I promise, it's worth it. A grilled cheese connoisseur.
All right. Well, if we're ever in South California.
And then Just in a Dream for 250 is asking for a video about a popular
grimoire
in the future.
I will be honest. I'm going to need to look up what that word means.
Yep.
And I'm going to do that really quickly.
And then Oyster Boy for 199 is also asking for a video about the lost continent of Mu.
Yes, Mu is important. We should eventually talk about Oz, the Theosophic Society.
Wait, Oz
Frank
as
Baum.
in like the Wizard of Oz?
Yes, and Liber Oz from Aleister Crowley, and Oz the word, which just means
Okay.
strength and is 77 in Hebrew. But yes, Theosophic Oz, because Frank Baum was a Theosophic, and Oz is about a little transgendered boy. The whole thing is really weird. But if you look into it, they talk about Mu and Lemuria, Mu, the Mer. Yeah. So we'll get awesome stuff.
The Lemuria stuff. I will probably do a video on like Atlantis and Lemuria.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, they're connected. They're different though.
Lemuria
different. Is supposed to be the preset.
Yeah, they're different for sure. Basically
the idea that
Lemuria kind of comes out of this one codex that was a copy of Mayan runes. And
there's several people that talk about Blavatsky really kind of it's her jam, and the idea that the world's a bunch of turtles that got tired of us and sunk underneath the sea, like in that third Aladdin movie. And then these are like the new turtlebacks or something. Like these are what's the word for that? Leviathans.
Yeah.
Like these are continents or living continents essentially that move every 1,000 years, like titans. And so also there's an into Africa theory, right? Which is the other thing with that, because we would have had to have gone to Africa at some point from Lemuria, or different parts of humans to different places. So like Lemurian Blavatsky theory gets really confusing, but it's also important because the 5 root races and everything we have today, our version of racism comes from Blavatsky, because she was saying we're all just one race that's evolving into, and eventually the new race will come out of Baja California and they'll be Power Rangers.
I can get behind the Baja California Power Rangers. Why not?
I get to be the Green Power Ranger. That's my dibs on the Green Ranger.
Love it. And then the final one to close this out is from SWA Danks for $5. It says, I got into a fight with a loose meat sandwich once. He was my sloppy foe.
I like it. I like that.
That was a good one. That was a good one. I'll give it to you. Jeez.
I think dad jokes like rewire people because they force you to laugh and they make the world a better place.
I like that take.
Yeah, I agree. All right. Well, that was a long one. This is a 2-hour podcast. Of course it was.
I only do 2-hour podcasts. Make sure you come to, if you can handle 2-hour podcasts, come watch mine. Every single one.
I certainly can. My parents, when I was down for Pop Culture Crisis, it was funny. They were like, we didn't realize it was a 2-hour show every day. And I was like, yeah. Now you're beginning to understand. But yeah, is this working now?
It should be.
Did we test it? Okay. Well, I guess we're about to test the button thing again. But to everybody who watched, thank you so much. To those who sent in questions, thank you for participating. Thank you for supporting the channel. Andreas, is there anywhere that you want people to find you?
Yeah, go to www.andreas.me or go to xirtus.com. And you can also find my YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, all the social media and everything like that. But yeah.
And what can people expect from your content?
I mean, so this is it, like us conversing about subjects and trying to find the milieu truth in that, and then being inspired to look into more things next time, always.
All right. Well, you guys know where to find him. You're already here. Thank you guys so much. And I will see you guys on Twitch tomorrow.
Peace out.
Aiden.
I figured we try it.
Aiden, it doesn't work.
Now
Now I look foolish.
No, you look genuine.
How dare you?